I know I might sound unhinged, but after what my now ex-husband Marcus pulled, I think my reaction was completely justified. This Christmas wasn't about peace on earth and goodwill toward men. It was about serving up ice-cold revenge with a side of public humiliation. Marcus and I had been married for 7 years. 7 years of what I thought was a solid partnership. We'd built a life together, a beautiful house in the suburbs, successful careers, shared friends, and plans for the future that included kids and growing old together. I genuinely believed we were happy, but 3 weeks before Christmas, my entire world came crashing down over something as mundane as laundry. I was doing the weekly wash when I found it, a receipt in Marcus's pants pocket. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but this one caught my attention because it was from Victoria's Secret for $347. That was strange for 2 reasons. First, Marcus had never bought me lingerie in our entire relationship, and second, I'd been with him the day this receipt was dated, and we definitely hadn't gone to Victoria's Secret. My hands started shaking as I looked at the itemized list. Size small bras, I'm a medium. Size XS panties, definitely not my size. And something called a seduction gift set that made my stomach turn. When Marcus came home that evening, I confronted him about it as casually as I could manage. "Hey, babe," I said, holding up the receipt. "I found this in your pocket. Did you get me an early Christmas present?" The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Pure panic, followed by that calculating expression people get when they're trying to figure out how to lie their way out of something. "Oh, that?" he said, attempting a laugh that sounded more like a nervous cough. "That's for my sister. You know how picky she is about intimate things. She asked me to pick something up for her. His sister lives in Portland. We live in Denver. She also happens to be a lesbian who's been with the same woman for 15 years and exclusively shops online because she hates crowded stores." "Really?" I said, keeping my voice light. "That's so thoughtful of you. I didn't know Lisa was into Victoria's Secret." "Yeah, well, she wanted to try something new," Marcus said, already walking away from the conversation. "I'm going to grab a shower before dinner." That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus sleep, my mind racing. The receipt could have been innocent. People lie about Christmas presents all the time, but something in my gut told me this was different. This was bigger. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Marcus left for his office at his usual time, kissing me goodbye and telling me to feel better, the same routine we'd followed for years. Except this time, I watched him drive away and immediately got to work. I started with his home office, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Credit card statements, phone bills, anything that might give me a clue about what was really going on. What I found was much worse than I'd imagined. Hidden in a folder labeled Tax Documents 2019. We'd been married since 2017, so why would he need separate tax documents? Were printed emails from dating websites, multiple dating websites, Ashley Madison, Match, even Tinder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read them, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been active on these sites for at least 2 years, maybe longer. The emails showed confirmed dates, exchanged phone numbers, and explicit conversations with women whose names I didn't recognize. But one name kept appearing more frequently than the others: Brittany. Brittany worked at his office, the marketing firm where Marcus was a senior account manager. I'd met her exactly once, at the company Christmas party 2 years ago. She was young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from being born with good genes and having the time to maintain them. Marcus had introduced her as the new girl in marketing, and I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now I was reading emails where Marcus was telling her how beautiful she was, how much he thought about her, how his marriage was complicated, and he was planning to make some changes soon. The Victoria's Secret receipt suddenly made perfect sense. I spent the rest of that day and the next 3 days conducting what I can only describe as a forensic investigation into my husband's double life. I felt like a detective, Except instead of solving crimes, I was uncovering the systematic destruction of my marriage. Marcus had been careful, but not careful enough. He'd used his work email for most of the dating site communications, probably thinking I'd never have access to it. What he didn't count on was that our home computer automatically saved passwords, and he'd logged into his work email from home multiple times. The evidence I found was devastating and extensive. 2 years of dating site activity, with at least 15 different women hotel receipts for business trips that I now realized were romantic getaways. Restaurant charges for expensive dinners on nights when he told me he was working late, Uber receipts, showing trips to neighborhoods where he had no business being, text message screenshots that made it clear these weren't just casual hookups. He was conducting full emotional affairs, but Brittany was clearly the main event. Their correspondence went back 18 months and showed a progression from workplace flirtation to full-blown relationship. They'd been on weekend trips together, while I thought he was at conferences. They had exchanged "I love you" messages, and most recently, they'd been discussing Marcus leaving me. "I can't wait until we can be together for real," Brittany had written in an email dated just 2 weeks earlier. "I'm tired of being your secret." "Soon," Marcus had replied. "I just need to figure out the best way to handle things with Sarah. I want to make sure I don't lose everything in a divorce." Reading that felt like being punched in the stomach. He wasn't staying with me out of love or commitment. He was staying with me to protect his assets while he planned his exit strategy. After 4 days of evidence gathering, I had enough material to destroy Marcus in any divorce proceeding. But as I sat in our living room, surrounded by printed emails and receipts and photos of my husband with other women, I realized that a quiet divorce wasn't what I wanted. Marcus had humiliated me. He'd made me feel like an idiot for trusting him, for believing in our marriage, for planning a future with someone who was actively planning to leave me. He'd been lying to my face for years while I cooked his dinners, did his laundry, and supported his career. A private divorce would be civilized and mature, and exactly what Marcus would prefer. He could spin some story about us growing apart and wanting different things, and no one would ever know the truth about what kind of person he really was. But it was almost Christmas, which meant the annual Christmas Eve party at his parents' house. The whole family would be there. His parents, his siblings, their kids, plus assorted aunts, uncles, and family friends. Brittany would probably be there too, since Marcus had started bringing work colleagues to family events over the past year. That's when I had what I can only describe as a moment of perfect clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I had 2 weeks to plan the perfect Christmas Eve revelation, and I approached it with the same attention to detail that I had brought to planning our wedding 7 years earlier. First, I needed to secure my evidence. I copied everything to multiple flash drives, uploaded it all to a cloud storage account that Marcus didn't know about, and printed physical copies of the most damning materials. I also took photos of everything with my phone and emailed them to my personal account from multiple addresses. Then I contacted a divorce attorney, not to file papers yet, but to understand my options and make sure I was protecting myself legally. The attorney, a sharp woman named Helen Morrison, who specialized in high-asset divorces, reviewed my evidence and assured me that I was in an excellent position. "With this level of documentation," she said, "infidelity won't necessarily impact the asset division, but it will certainly influence spousal support and custody considerations if you have children." We didn't have children, but Marcus made significantly more money than I did, and in a normal divorce, I'd be entitled to alimony. Helen explained that while Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, adultery could still be relevant in determining spousal support. "The most important thing," Helen advised, "is that you don't do anything that could be construed as harassment or could damage your credibility in court. Document everything, but don't retaliate in ways that could hurt your case." I assured her that I would be completely professional in my approach. I may have been slightly less than honest about that. The week before Christmas, I went shopping. But instead of buying presents for Marcus, why would I? I was shopping for props for my grand finale. I bought a new laptop specifically for the presentation I was planning to create. I purchased a wireless presenter remote, the kind professors use for lectures. I even bought a small portable projector as backup, just in case the TV connection didn't work properly. I also went to the craft store and bought supplies for what I was calling Operation Evidence Board, poster boards, markers, photo paper, and those little plastic sleeves that protect important documents. But my masterpiece was going to be the slideshow. I spent hours creating what I can only describe as the most thorough and devastating PowerPoint presentation of my life. I included a timeline of Marcus's infidelity with dates and locations, screenshots of his dating profiles, all of them. Photos of Marcus with various women, including several with Brittany text message conversations, showing the progression of his relationship with Brittany hotel and restaurant receipts proving his lies about working late and business trips. A financial breakdown showing how much money he'd spent on his affairs. Spoiler alert, it was enough to pay for a nice vacation for two honest people. I even included a slide titled, "And the Academy Award for Best Performance by a Lying Husband Goes to," with Marcus's photo and a list of his most creative excuses for his absences. The presentation was 43 slides long and included a soundtrack. I had carefully selected songs for maximum emotional impact, including Before He Cheats by Carrie Underwood and Somebody That I Used to Know by Gaudy Christmas Eve arrived, and I was ready. I had spent the morning getting my hair and nails done, not because I wanted to look good for Marcus, but because I wanted to look confident and put together when I destroyed his life in front of his entire family. I wore the red dress Marcus had always said was his favorite, seemed appropriate for the occasion. Marcus was nervous that morning, though he tried to hide it. He kept asking if I was feeling okay, if I was sure I wanted to go to his parents' house, if maybe we should just stay home and have a quiet Christmas Eve. "Are you kidding?" I said, smiling brightly. "I wouldn't miss your family Christmas for anything. I've been looking forward to it all year." Which was absolutely true, just not in the way he thought. We arrived at his parents' house at 5 p.m., the same time we always did. The house was beautifully decorated, filled with the smell of his mother's famous Christmas Eve dinner, and buzzing with conversation from the 20-odd family members and friends who'd gathered for the celebration. And there was Brittany, looking gorgeous in a green dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, chatting with Marcus's sister like she belonged there. "Oh, you remember Brittany from work?" Marcus said when we approached the group. "She didn't have anywhere to go for Christmas, so I thought it would be nice to include her." "Of course," I said, giving Brittany my biggest, most genuine smile. "It's so wonderful that you could join us. Family is so important, especially during the holidays." Brittany looked a little confused by my enthusiasm, but smiled back politely. Marcus's mother, Carol, came over to greet us with her usual warm hugs and excited chatter about the dinner she'd been preparing all day. His father, Bill, was in his element as host, making sure everyone had drinks and was comfortable. These were good people who'd welcomed me into their family 7 years ago and had always treated me like a daughter. They deserved to know what kind of son they'd raised. Everyone gathered around the extended dining room table, finding their assigned seats. I'd subtly rearranged the place cards to ensure that Marcus and Brittany were sitting directly across from each other, with me at the head of the table. The room was warm and inviting, lit by candles and filled with the comfortable chatter of a family who genuinely enjoyed spending time together. I stood up and tapped my wine glass with a fork, just like they do in movies. The conversation gradually died down as everyone turned their attention to me. "Thank you all for your attention," I began, smiling warmly at the gathered faces. "I know we usually save the toasts for after dinner, but I have something special I wanted to share with everyone tonight." Marcus was looking at me with a mixture of pride and confusion. His parents were beaming. They had always loved it when I participated in family traditions. Brittany was smiling politely, probably wondering how long this would take. 7 years ago, I continued, I became part of this wonderful family. Carol and Bill, you welcomed me with open arms and made me feel like a daughter from day one. You've been there for every milestone, every celebration, every challenge that Marcus and I have faced together. Nods and smiles around the table. This was going exactly as I'd hoped. And Marcus, I said, turning to look at my husband, you've been such an important part of my life. You've taught me so much about myself, about what I value, about what I'm willing to accept, and what I absolutely won't tolerate. Marcus smiled uncertainly. Something in my tone was probably starting to worry him, but he couldn't figure out what. Which brings me to tonight's special presentation, I said, pulling out my laptop. I've put together a little slideshow about marriage commitment and the importance of honesty in relationships. I think everyone here will find it educational. The confusion around the table was palpable as I connected my laptop to the large TV that dominated one wall of the dining room. Carol and Bill exchanged glances, probably wondering why their daughter-in-law was giving what sounded like a lecture during Christmas Eve dinner. Marcus was looking decidedly uncomfortable now, but he couldn't very well object without seeming rude in front of his family. This won't take long, I assured everyone as the first slide appeared on the screen. It was simple and elegant. The Marcus Morrison story, a Christmas tale of love, lies, and dating apps. The silence that followed was deafening. "What the hell is this?" Marcus said, half standing from his chair. "Please sit down, honey," I said sweetly. "We're just getting started." The second slide was a photo of Marcus and me on our wedding day, with the caption, "Once Upon a Time," followed immediately by a slide titled The End with a photo of Marcus kissing Brittany in what was clearly a hotel room. The gasps around the table were audible. Carol dropped her fork. Bill choked on his wine. Marcus's sister stared at the screen with her mouth open. And Brittany? Brittany looked like she was going to faint. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "I'm sharing our story with the family," I said, advancing to the next slide. Slide 4, a timeline of deception. Let's start with 18 months ago when Marcus first messaged Brittany on the company Slack channel. What followed was the most thorough and devastating 15-minute presentation of my life. I walked through Marcus's infidelity with the precision of a prosecutor, presenting evidence to a jury. I showed screenshots of his dating profiles, complete with the lies he'd told about being separated, we weren't, and looking for someone who understood that relationships were complicated. They're really not that complicated when you're honest. I displayed photos of Marcus with various women in restaurants, hotels, and vacation destinations, with dates and locations clearly marked. The family watched in stunned silence as evidence mounted that their beloved son and brother had been living a double life for years, but the real showstopper was the documentation of his relationship with Brittany. I had emails, text messages, photos, and even a video that Marcus had apparently sent her from our bedroom while I was at work. "And here," I said, clicking to a slide titled "The Christmas Gift That Keeps on Giving," "we have the Victoria's Secret receipt that started this whole investigation." I'd scanned the receipt and blown it up so everyone could read the itemized list of intimate apparel that Marcus had purchased for his girlfriend while married to me. "Marcus," his mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is this true?" Marcus looked like a cornered animal. His face was bright red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "Sarah, you're being completely inappropriate. This is a private matter between us." "Private?" I laughed. "You made it public when you brought your girlfriend to Christmas dinner with your family. Speaking of which, let's talk about Brittany's role in all this." I clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of Brittany's integration into Marcus's family life over the past year. Photos from the company Christmas party, a barbecue at his parents' house last summer, even a birthday party for his nephew where she'd been presented as just a work friend. "Brittany," I said, turning to address her directly, Would you like to tell the family about your relationship with Marcus, or should I continue with the presentation? She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, looking everywhere except at the family members who were staring at her in shock and disgust. I didn't know this was how you were going to find out, she whispered. Find out what? Bill demanded. That Marcus and I are in love, Brittany said, her voice getting stronger. That he's been unhappy in his marriage for years and was planning to leave Sarah anyway. The eruption that followed was immediate and spectacular. What happened next can only be described as controlled chaos. Marcus's mother started crying and demanding explanations. His father stood up and told Marcus he was disgusted with him. His sister called him a pathetic piece of shit in front of her children. His teenage nephew asked if this meant Uncle Marcus was getting divorced, and his 8-year-old niece wanted to know why everyone was yelling. Marcus tried to take control of the situation, standing up and attempting to address the room. Everyone needs to calm down. Yes, Sarah and I have been having problems. Yes, I've developed feelings for someone else. But this is not how I wanted anyone to find out. And Sarah is being vindictive and cruel. Vindictive and cruel? I repeated. Marcus, you've been cheating on me for 2 years. You've been spending our money on other women. You've been bringing your girlfriend to family events and introducing her as a work colleague. You've been planning to leave me while pretending everything was fine. And I'm the one being cruel? You didn't have to humiliate me in front of my entire family, he said. You humiliated yourself, his father said, his voice cold with anger. And you humiliated this family by bringing your girlfriend to our home while you're still married. Brittany was sobbing now, trying to gather her things and leave. I should go, she said. I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. No, I said, blocking her path to the door. You don't get to leave yet. We're not done. I clicked to the final section of my presentation, the financial cost of infidelity. This part is especially interesting, I told the room, because it turns out that affairs are expensive. Let me show you exactly how much of our marital assets Marcus has spent on his extracurricular activities. The next slide showed a detailed breakdown of Marcus's affair-related expenses over the past 2 years. Hotels, restaurants, gifts, weekend trips, even the cost of the various dating site memberships. The grand total, I announced, is $47,000. That's money from our joint accounts, money that was supposed to be for our future together, our house payments, our retirement savings. Carol gasped. $47,000? But wait, there's more, I said, channeling my inner infomercial announcer, because Marcus has also been planning his exit strategy. Show them, honey. I clicked to a slide showing screenshots of emails between Marcus and a divorce attorney dated 3 months earlier. The emails discussed asset protection strategies and ways to minimize alimony payments. Marcus has been planning to divorce me for months, I explained, but he wanted to do it in a way that would leave me with as little as possible. He's been hiding money, undervaluing assets, and strategizing how to screw me over financially. That's not true, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then explain this. I showed the final slide. An email from Marcus to his attorney discussing the possibility of claiming that I was having an affair to avoid paying alimony. The silence in the room was deafening. You piece of shit, Marcus's sister said. You've been cheating on Sarah for 2 years, and you were going to claim that she was unfaithful. It's a legal strategy, Marcus mumbled. It's fraud, I corrected. And it's about to become very expensive for you. I packed up my laptop and addressed the room one final time. I want everyone to know that I don't blame any of you for Marcus's choices, I said. You're wonderful people, and you've been a real family to me for 7 years. I'm sorry this is how you had to find out what kind of person Marcus really is, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. I turned to Marcus. Your things are packed and in the garage. I've changed the locks on the house. You can pick up your stuff tomorrow when I'm at work. After that, all communication goes through my attorney." "Sarah, we need to talk about this," Marcus said desperately. "This doesn't have to be so dramatic." "You're right," I agreed. "It didn't have to be dramatic. You could have been honest with me 2 years ago when you started cheating. You could have filed for divorce when you realized you wanted to be with someone else. You could have treated me with basic human decency instead of lying to my face while planning to screw me over financially." I grabbed my coat and purse. "But you chose drama when you decided to bring your girlfriend to Christmas dinner, so drama is what you get." As I headed for the door, Marcus's mother caught my arm. "Sarah," she said, tears in her eyes, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "I know you didn't," I said, hugging her. "And I'm sorry this ruined your Christmas Eve." "You didn't ruin anything," she said firmly. "Marcus did." I left them to deal with the fallout and drove home to my quiet house, where I opened a bottle of wine and called my attorney to schedule a meeting for the day after Christmas. The divorce proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Thanks to my thorough documentation of Marcus's infidelity and financial misconduct, I was in an excellent negotiating position. Marcus tried to claim that my Christmas Eve presentation was emotional abuse and that I'd violated his privacy by accessing his emails and phone records. His attorney quickly informed him that in Colorado, infidelity-related evidence is generally admissible, and that his own emails about hiding assets would not play well in front of a judge. He settled out of court, agreeing to a division of assets that heavily favored me and waiving any claim to alimony. I kept the house, the better car, and most of our savings. Marcus got his clothes, his golf clubs, and the privilege of starting over with nothing but his salary and his reputation in tatters. Because, yes, word of the Christmas Eve incident spread quickly through our social circle. Marcus's family didn't keep the story to themselves, and soon everyone we knew had heard about the slideshow presentation and the $47,000 in affair expenses. Marcus lost several friends who decided they couldn't trust someone who had lied so extensively to his wife. His standing at work became uncomfortable when people learned about his relationship with Brittany and the way it had developed. He ended up taking a job with a smaller firm for significantly less money. Brittany, for her part, found that being known as the woman who broke up a marriage wasn't great for her social media influencer aspirations. Several brands dropped her from sponsorship deals, and her follower count plummeted after the story went viral on local social media groups. 6 months after Christmas Eve, I was living my best life. The house felt more like home without Marcus's presence. I had redecorated, gotten a dog, and started hosting dinner parties for the friends who had rallied around me during the divorce. Marcus's family stayed in touch with me, particularly his mother, who called regularly to check on me and apologize again for her son's behavior. His sister even invited me to her daughter's birthday party, which felt like a victory. "You know," she told me at the party, "I always liked you better than Marcus anyway." I'd also started dating again, casually and carefully. My experience with Marcus had taught me to pay attention to red flags and to trust my instincts when something felt off. I was in no rush to get serious with anyone, but it felt good to remember that not all men were lying, cheating sociopaths. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling. The relationship with Brittany hadn't survived the public exposure and the loss of income from his career change. Apparently, she'd decided that dating a disgraced middle-aged man with limited financial prospects wasn't as appealing as she'd originally thought. He'd tried to contact me several times, wanting to explain and apologize properly. I'd blocked his number and had my attorney send a cease and desist letter when he started showing up at places where he knew I'd be. A year later, I looked back on Christmas Eve as one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it was public. Yes, it probably hurt some innocent people who got caught in the crossfire, but Marcus had been planning to hurt me much worse. He'd been strategizing how to leave me with nothing, while he rode off into the sunset with his younger girlfriend and most of our assets. He'd been prepared to lie about me in court to avoid paying alimony. He'd shown me exactly how little respect he had for me, our marriage, and our shared life. So I'd shown him exactly how it felt to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. The difference was that everything I'd revealed about Marcus was true. I documented his lies with his own words and actions. I hadn't made anything up or exaggerated anything for effect. I'd simply presented the facts in a way that made his behavior impossible to deny or minimize. "Do you ever regret it?" my therapist asked during one of our sessions. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is not trusting my instincts sooner. I knew something was off for months before I found that receipt. I just kept telling myself I was being paranoid." And the presentation itself? The public nature of it? I thought about that for a moment. Marcus spent 2 years making me feel crazy, making me doubt my own perceptions, lying to my face while planning to destroy my life. He brought his girlfriend to Christmas dinner with his family while still married to me. He earned every second of that humiliation. Some people might say revenge isn't healthy. Some people might say that exposing a liar isn't revenge, it's justice. This Christmas Eve, I hosted my own dinner party. 20 friends gathered around my dining room table, including several people who had been at Marcus's parents' house the year before and had witnessed the infamous slideshow. "You know," my friend Jessica said over dessert, "I still can't believe you had the courage to do what you did last year." "It wasn't courage," I said. "It was just being tired of being lied to." "Well, whatever you call it, it was legendary," said Tom, who worked at Marcus's old company and had heard the story secondhand. "I heard they still talk about it at the office." "Poor Brittany," someone said, though not with much sympathy. "I heard she moved back to her hometown." "And Marcus?" Jessica asked. "Still single, still struggling, still probably lying to someone about something," I said. "But that's not my problem anymore." As my guests left that evening, hugging me goodbye and thanking me for a wonderful evening, I realized how much my life had improved since Marcus left it. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, who valued honesty and integrity, who showed up for me when things got difficult. Marcus had taught me what I wouldn't accept in a relationship. My friends had shown me what I deserved. And my Christmas Eve slideshow, it had become the stuff of local legend. A cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the woman you've been lying to, and a reminder that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply telling the truth. I never did send Marcus a Christmas card that year, but if I had, it would have said exactly what I was feeling. "Thanks for the best Christmas gift ever, showing me who you really were." I have been with my husband for 17 years. We have 3 children together, and when we first got married, I thought I'd found my forever person. I was always someone who believed in monogamy, in building a life with one person and growing older together. That was the dream I held on to through everything that came after. Looking back now, I can see that maybe I should have paid attention to the warning signs earlier. But when you're young and in love, you tend to overlook things that would be red flags to someone with more experience. My husband, David, was charming and attentive when we were dating. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world, and I fell hard for that feeling. We got married when I was 18 and he was 19. Too young, everyone said, but we were determined to prove them wrong. We wanted to build something lasting, something that would withstand whatever life threw at us. For the first few years, things seemed good. We were both working, saving money, talking about having kids, and buying a house. David was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. He worked hard, he was good with money, and he seemed committed to our future together. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. The first time I discovered David's infidelity, we'd been married for about 5 years. Our first child was just 2 years old, and I was pregnant with our second. I should have been in one of the happiest periods of my life, but instead, I felt like my world was crumbling. I found out because I answered his phone when it rang while he was in the shower. The woman on the other end asked for Danny, a nickname only his family used, and when I said he couldn't come to the phone, she said, "Oh, well, just tell him Rebecca called, from work." David didn't have any coworkers named Rebecca. When I confronted him about it, he initially tried to lie, saying Rebecca was someone new at his office, and that she'd probably just gotten the wrong number, but I pressed him, and eventually the truth came out. Rebecca was a woman he'd met at a bar after work, and they'd been seeing each other for about 3 months. I was devastated. Here I was, pregnant with his child, taking care of our toddler, and he was out having an affair with some woman he'd picked up at a bar. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest. David swore it meant nothing, that it was just a mistake, that he'd been feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being a husband and father and had made a stupid decision. He begged me to forgive him, promised it would never happen again, and said he wanted to work on our marriage. I was 23 years old, pregnant, with a 2-year-old and no real support system. My parents lived across the country, and I'd lost touch with most of my friends after getting married so young. The idea of being a single mother with 2 kids terrified me more than the idea of staying with a cheating husband. So I stayed. I forgave him. And I convinced myself that this was just a rough patch that we could get through together. Over the next few years, I started to notice things. David would work late more often than seemed necessary. He'd get text messages at odd hours that he'd quickly delete. He'd take phone calls outside, claiming it was work-related, but speaking in hushed tones that didn't sound professional. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he'd promised to be faithful, and I wanted to trust him. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who went through her husband's phone or questioned his every move, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. When our youngest was about 4 years old, that feeling proved to be justified. I discovered that David had been having an ongoing affair with a woman named Jennifer, who worked at the gym where he'd recently started going. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a full relationship that had been going on for almost a year. I found out when Jennifer called our house looking for him on a Saturday morning. She seemed surprised when I answered, and when I asked who was calling, she hung up. Something about the call felt wrong, so I did something I'd never done before. I went through David's phone while he was outside mowing the lawn. What I found broke my heart all over again. Months of text messages between David and Jennifer, photos they'd sent each other, plans for weekend getaways that I'd thought were work trips. They had inside jokes, pet names for each other, and a level of intimacy that made it clear this was much more than just a physical affair. The worst part was reading messages where David complained about me and our marriage. He called me needy and boring, said I'd let myself go after having kids, and told Jennifer that he was only staying with me because of the children. This time, I couldn't just forgive and forget. I was too hurt, too angry, and too humiliated by what I'd read. I told David I wanted a separation, and that if he wanted to save our marriage, he'd have to end things with Jennifer and agree to marriage counseling. David seemed genuinely shocked that I was taking such a hard line. I think he'd gotten comfortable with the idea that I would just put up with his infidelity indefinitely. But seeing the look on my face when I confronted him with the evidence seemed to wake him up to the reality that he might actually lose his family. He ended things with Jennifer immediately and agreed to counseling. We spent 6 months separated, with David living in a small apartment while I stayed in our house with the kids. During that time, we had weekly counseling sessions where we tried to work through what had gone wrong in our marriage and how we could fix it. David seemed genuinely remorseful. He talked about how he'd gotten caught up in the excitement of someone new being interested in him, how he'd felt like he was losing his identity and the responsibilities of being a husband and father, and how he'd convinced himself that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me. "I never meant to hurt you," he said during one particularly emotional session. "I love you and the kids more than anything. I just made some really stupid decisions." The counselor helped us work through communication issues and ways to reconnect as a couple. David made an effort to be more present at home, to help more with the kids, and to show me affection in ways he hadn't in years. Slowly, I started to believe that maybe we could make this work. Maybe this had been the wake-up call our marriage needed. We reconciled after about 8 months of separation, and for a while, things seemed better. David was attentive and affectionate. He helped around the house more, spent quality time with the kids, and made an effort to plan date nights for us. He was like the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I wanted so badly to believe that we'd turned a corner. I convinced myself that David had learned his lesson, that he understood how much his infidelity had hurt me and our family, and that he was committed to being faithful going forward. We even had good times together during this period. We took family vacations, celebrated anniversaries, and made plans for the future. David would tell me he loved me, that he was grateful I'd given him another chance, and that he was committed to being the husband I deserved. But even during the good times, there was always a part of me that remained guarded. I found myself paying attention to his behavior in ways I never had before. I noticed when he was on his phone more than usual, when he worked late, when he seemed distant or distracted. David would get frustrated with my lack of complete trust, saying things like, "I thought we were past this," or "How long are you going to punish me for my mistakes?" He wanted me to act like nothing had ever happened, to go back to the naive wife who didn't question anything. But I couldn't unknow what I knew about his capacity for deception. I couldn't forget how easily he'd lied to my face for months while carrying on relationships with other women. 4 years passed. 4 years of what I thought was healing and rebuilding. Our kids were getting older, 12, 10, and 8, and we'd settled into what felt like a stable family life. I'd started to relax my guard, to believe that maybe David really had changed. That's when my friend Lisa called me with news that would shatter everything again. "Sarah," she said, her voice careful and hesitant, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it." Lisa's husband Mark worked with David at the construction company where they'd both been employed for several years. They'd become friends over time, and Mark and Lisa had even come to a few family barbecues and birthday parties. "Mark came home yesterday really upset," Lisa continued. "He said he'd been struggling with whether to say anything, but he couldn't keep quiet anymore." My heart was already sinking before she said the words. "David's been having an affair with Amy from the office. Mark said it's been going on for months, and everyone at work knows about it except you." Amy. I knew who Amy was. She was the young receptionist at David's company, probably about 25 years old, with long blonde hair and the kind of figure I'd had before having 3 kids. David had mentioned her a few times, always casually, always in the context of work. "She's really efficient," he'd said once. "Great at keeping the office organized. She brought in homemade cookies for everyone," he'd mentioned another time. "Really sweet girl." Now I understood why he'd been so complimentary about her. He'd been sleeping with her. This time, I wasn't going to confront David until I had all the facts. I'd learned from the previous betrayals that he was skilled at minimizing, deflecting, and making me feel like I was overreacting. I wanted evidence that he couldn't argue with or explain away. I started paying closer attention to his behavior and schedule. I noticed that he'd been working late more often in recent months, and that he'd started going to the gym again after work, something he'd stopped doing during our reconciliation period. I checked our phone records and found that he'd been texting and calling a number I didn't recognize multiple times a day. When I reverse looked up the number, it was registered to Amy Collins. I looked at our credit card statements and found charges for restaurants, hotels, and even jewelry that I'd never seen. When I asked David about them, he claimed they were work expenses or things he'd bought for his mother. The evidence was overwhelming, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I acted. So I did something I'd never done before. I followed him. One evening when David said he was going to the gym after work, I got a babysitter and drove to his office building. I waited in the parking lot until I saw his truck, then followed him as he drove not to the gym, but to a hotel about 20 minutes away. I sat in my car watching as David walked into the hotel lobby. 10 minutes later, Amy arrived in her red sedan. She walked into the same hotel, and neither of them came back out for the 2 hours I sat there waiting. That was all the proof I needed. When David came home that night, I was sitting at our kitchen table with printed copies of the phone records, credit card statements, and photos I'd taken at the hotel. "We need to talk," I said. David took one look at the papers spread out in front of me, and his face went white. For a moment, he looked like he was going to try to lie his way out of it, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "How long have you known?" he asked. "How long has it been going on?" I countered. "About 6 months," he admitted. 6 months. Half a year of lies, deception, and betrayal while I'd been planning our daughter's birthday party, helping our son with his science project, and believing that we'd built something real together. "Is it serious?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. David was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally said. "I care about her." The honesty of that admission hurt worse than if he'd just said it was meaningless sex. At least meaningless sex could be dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment. This was emotional infidelity on top of physical betrayal. "Do you love her?" I asked. I think I might," he said quietly. And there it was. After 17 years of marriage, 3 children, and 2 previous betrayals that I'd forgiven, my husband was telling me that he thought he might love another woman. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tonight." David looked surprised, like he'd expected me to react the way I had the previous times, with tears, anger, and eventually forgiveness. "Sarah, we can work through this," he said. "It doesn't have to end our marriage." "Yes, it does," I said firmly. "This is the 3rd time, David. The 3rd time I've discovered that you're cheating on me. I can't do this anymore." "But what about the kids? What about everything we've built together?" "You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Amy," I said. "You should have thought about it before Rebecca and before Jennifer. You should have thought about it before you told another woman that you might love her." David tried to argue, to negotiate, to make promises about how things would be different this time. But I was done listening. I'd heard it all before, and I'd believed it before, and it had led me right back to the same place. "I'll give you 1 hour to pack some clothes," I said. "You can come back tomorrow when I'm at work to get more of your things, but I don't want you sleeping in this house tonight." "Where am I supposed to go?" "You can go to Amy's place," I said, "since you think you might love her." The look on David's face told me that staying with Amy wasn't actually an option, which made me wonder if she even knew he was married. David left that night, and I was alone with 3 confused and scared children who wanted to know why Daddy wasn't coming home. I tried to explain it in age-appropriate terms, but how do you tell your kids that their father has been unfaithful multiple times without destroying their image of him entirely? The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children while my life fell apart around me. David had rented a small apartment across town and was trying to establish a visitation schedule with the kids. He also kept trying to contact me, wanting to talk things through and work on our marriage. He seemed genuinely surprised that I was serious about getting divorced, like he'd assumed I would eventually calm down and take him back like I had before. "I made a mistake," he said during one phone conversation. "But we have 17 years together, Sarah. Doesn't that count for something?" "Yes, it counts," I said. "It counts as 17 years of me giving you chance after chance, and you throwing it away every time. This could be different. I could end things with Amy, and we could go to counseling again. David, you told me you think you love her. You can't take that back. And even if you could, I can't trust anything you say anymore. Your word means nothing to me. About 3 weeks after David moved out, I got a call from Amy. She'd somehow gotten my number and wanted to talk to me. I think there are some things you should know, she said. We met at a coffee shop near my work, and what Amy told me made me realize that David's betrayal was even worse than I'd understood. I didn't know he was married when we started seeing each other, Amy said. He told me he was divorced, that it had been finalized about a year ago. My blood ran cold. What? He said you two had split up because you'd grown apart after having kids, and that you were both happier co-parenting than being married. He showed me pictures of the kids and talked about how much he loved them, but he never mentioned that you were still together. So David hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been lying to Amy too, making her an unwitting participant in his deception. When did you find out the truth? I asked. When he moved into his apartment and started talking about how complicated the divorce was getting, Amy said. Some of the things he said didn't add up, so I did some research online. I found your social media profiles and realized you'd been posting pictures of family activities just weeks before he told me he was single. Amy looked genuinely distraught. I'm so sorry, she said. I would never have gotten involved with a married man. I have ethics, and David completely lied to me about the situation. Have you ended things with him? I asked. Immediately, she said. As soon as I realized what was really going on, I told him I never wanted to see him again. So David had lost both his wife and his girlfriend in the span of a month. I should have felt some satisfaction in that, but mostly I just felt tired. David didn't take the end of his relationship with Amy well, and he started taking his frustration out on me through the divorce proceedings. What had started as a relatively amicable split became contentious when David decided he wanted 50-50 custody of the children. I have just as much right to my kids as you do, he said during one particularly heated mediation session. You also had a responsibility to their mother, and you failed at that repeatedly, I replied. David's lawyer argued that his infidelity had no bearing on his ability to be a good father, and technically, that was true. But I was terrified of the idea of my children spending half their time with a man who had such a casual relationship with honesty and commitment. During the custody evaluation, the social worker asked the children about their feelings regarding the divorce and their living situation. What they said broke my heart. Our oldest, Emma, who was 12, said she was angry at her dad for making Mom cry all the time. Our middle child, Jake, who was 10, said he didn't understand why his parents couldn't just be nice to each other. And our youngest, Lily, who was 8, asked if the divorce was her fault because she'd been bad sometimes. The social worker recommended that the children remain primarily with me, with David having them every other weekend and one evening per week. It wasn't the 50-50 split David had wanted, but it was more than I was comfortable with. 6 months after David moved out, we were officially divorced. I kept the house, and David paid child support and alimony. It wasn't a generous settlement, but it was enough for me and the kids to maintain some stability. David continued to see the children according to the custody schedule, but it was clear that his relationship with them had been damaged by the divorce. They were polite with him, but distant, especially Emma, who seemed to understand more about the situation than I wished she did. I struggled with single parenthood in ways I hadn't expected. Not just financially, though money was tight, but emotionally. I'd been married for 17 years, and suddenly I was making all the decisions about the children by myself. I was the one they came to with problems, the one who had to enforce discipline, the one who worried about their futures. But there were also unexpected benefits to being on my own. I could make decisions without having to consider David's opinion or get his approval. I could plan activities with the kids without worrying about whether David would object. I could go to bed at night without wondering if my husband was being faithful or if he was texting another woman. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. About a year after our divorce was finalized, David started reaching out to me more frequently. At first, it was just about the kids, questions about their school schedules or permission to take them somewhere. But gradually, the conversations became more personal. "I miss you," he said during one phone call. "I miss our family." "David, we're divorced," I reminded him. "We're not a family anymore in that way." "But we could be," he said. "I've learned from my mistakes, Sarah. I know what I lost, and I want to make things right." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. "You've learned from your mistakes before, David? Multiple times." It didn't stick. This time is different. I've been in therapy working on myself. I understand now why I was so destructive to our marriage. "What did you figure out?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I was selfish," he said. "I was thinking about what I wanted in the moment instead of thinking about the consequences of my actions. I was taking you for granted because I assumed you'd always be there no matter what I did." It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard David say, but it was also too little, too late. "I appreciate that you're working on yourself," I said, "but I can't be part of that process. I've moved on, David. I'm building a different life now." "What if I could prove to you that I've changed?" he asked. "How would you do that?" "Give me a chance. Let me show you that I can be the husband you deserved all along." "I'm not looking for a husband anymore," I said. "I'm perfectly happy being single." And I was. After years of walking on eggshells, wondering if my husband was being faithful and forgiving betrayal after betrayal, being alone felt like freedom. 2 years after the divorce, my friends started encouraging me to date again. "You're only 37, my friend Lisa said. "You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't let David's mistakes make you give up on love entirely." But the idea of dating terrified me. How do you trust someone new when the person you trusted most in the world betrayed you repeatedly? How do you open your heart to someone when you have 3 children to protect? I tried online dating briefly, but every man I met seemed to have some red flag that reminded me of David. One was too charming, which made me suspicious of his motives. Another was recently divorced and bitter about his ex-wife, which made me wonder what his side of the story was. A third seemed too good to be true, which made me assume he was hiding something. "You're not being fair to these guys," Lisa pointed out after I told her about canceling another second date. "You're judging them based on what David did, not on who they actually are." She was right, but I didn't know how to turn off the hypervigilance that had become my default mode. David had taught me that even the person who claims to love you most can lie to your face for months or years. How do you unlearn that lesson? As the kids got older, they started asking more questions about the divorce and why their father and I couldn't work things out. Emma, now 14, was particularly direct in her inquiries. "Dad says you wouldn't give him another chance," she said one evening while we were doing dishes together. "He says he made mistakes, but that you wouldn't forgive him." I dreaded this conversation, but I'd known it was coming eventually. David had clearly been talking to the children about our marriage in ways that painted me as the unreasonable one. "Your father did make mistakes," I said carefully, "and I did forgive him more than once. But sometimes, when someone keeps making the same mistake over and over, you have to accept that they're not going to change." "What kind of mistakes?" Emma asked. She was old enough to understand, but I still didn't want to be the one to tell her that her father had been unfaithful. That seemed like David's responsibility, not mine. "That's something you should talk to your father about," I said. "But I want you to know that the divorce wasn't your fault, or Jake's fault, or Lily's fault. It was about problems between your dad and me as adults. But if you loved each other, shouldn't you have been able to work it out? Love isn't always enough, I said. Sometimes you can love someone but not be able to trust them anymore. And without trust, a marriage can't work. Emma seemed to consider this. Do you still love Dad? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself many times. I love him as the father of my children, I said. But I'm not in love with him anymore. Will you ever get married again? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, if I meet someone who makes me want to take that risk again. 3 years after the divorce, I ran into David at our son Jake's baseball game. We'd managed to coordinate our schedules so that we usually didn't attend the same events, but this was the championship game, and neither of us wanted to miss it. David looked older than I remembered, more tired. He'd gained some weight, and his hair was starting to thin. He was alone, which surprised me. I'd assumed he was probably dating someone new by now. Hi, Sarah, he said when he saw me in the bleachers. Hi, I replied neutrally. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, both watching Jake warm up with his team. He's gotten really good, David said eventually. He practices a lot, I said. He's very dedicated. That's great. That's really great. More silence. Sarah, David said suddenly, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I want you to know that I think about what I did to our marriage every day. I know I destroyed something good, and I regret it more than I can express. I looked at him, this man I'd been married to for 17 years, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a mild sense of pity for someone who'd made choices that cost him his family. I appreciate you saying that, I said. But David, it doesn't change anything. It can't change anything. I know, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know. Jake struck out in the third inning, and I watched David's face crumple with disappointment for his son. In that moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him all those years ago. He'd been a man who cared deeply about the people he loved, even if he hadn't always known how to show it appropriately. But caring wasn't enough. Good intentions weren't enough. Love, as I'd told Emma, wasn't always enough. By the time our divorce was 3 years old, I'd finally started to feel like myself again. Not the person I'd been before I met David. That naive 18-year-old was long gone, but a stronger, wiser version of who I was meant to be. I'd gone back to school to finish my degree, something I'd put on hold when I got married so young. I was working as a nurse now, a career that gave me both financial independence and personal satisfaction. The kids were thriving. Emma was 16 and thinking about college. Jake was 14 and still playing baseball with a passion that amazed me. Lily was 12 and had discovered a talent for art that I was encouraging her to pursue. We'd built a good life together, the four of us. Not the life I'd originally planned, but a life that was authentically ours. I'd even started dating someone, Michael, a teacher at Lily's school who was patient, kind, and refreshingly honest about his own flaws and mistakes. We took things slowly, partly because of my children and partly because I needed to learn how to trust again. I know I'm competing with some pretty significant baggage, Michael said one evening after we'd been seeing each other for about 6 months. You're not competing with anything, I told him. You're just dealing with someone who's learned to be careful with her heart. I can work with careful, he said, smiling. Careful people make better partners anyway. Looking back now, I can see that David's infidelities were never really about me. They were about his own insecurities, his fear of missing out, his inability to be satisfied with what he had. No amount of forgiveness from me could have fixed those issues. David had to want to fix them himself. I used to blame myself for his affairs. I thought maybe if I'd been prettier, more interesting, better in bed, more understanding, he wouldn't have strayed. But I understand now that David's infidelity was a choice he made repeatedly, and it would have happened no matter what kind of wife I'd been. The 3 women I knew about, Rebecca, Jennifer, and Amy, were all different types. Rebecca was a party girl he'd met at a bar. Jennifer was a fitness enthusiast who shared his interest in working out. Amy was a young professional just starting her career. The only thing they had in common was that they weren't me, weren't his wife, weren't part of his daily reality. David was always looking for something new, something exciting, something that made him feel young and desirable. That's not a problem that can be solved by being a better spouse. It's a problem that can only be solved by learning to appreciate what you have and understanding that the grass isn't actually greener on the other side. Chapter 20. The Future. I don't know what the future holds for me and my children. Emma will be going to college in 2 years, and I'm already starting to think about what my life will look like when it's just Jake, Lily, and me. Eventually, all 3 of them will be adults with their own lives, and I'll be on my own for the first time since I was 18 years old. That prospect doesn't scare me the way it once did. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, more resilient than I gave myself credit for. I survived the end of a 17-year marriage, raised 3 children largely on my own, and built a new career from scratch. I can handle whatever comes next. Michael and I are talking about moving in together next year, but we're taking it slow. My children's stability comes first, and I won't introduce that kind of change into their lives unless I'm absolutely certain it's the right decision. As for David, he's still part of our lives because he's the children's father, but he's no longer the central figure he once was. He sees the kids according to the custody schedule, pays his support on time, and occasionally asks about getting back together. I always give him the same answer. We're both better off apart. I think he's finally starting to believe me. If I could go back and talk to my 18-year-old self, the girl who thought love was enough to conquer anything, I would tell her to pay attention to actions, not words. I would tell her that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and that some mistakes deserve consequences. I would tell her that being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't respect you, and that children are better off with one happy parent than 2 miserable ones. Most importantly, I would tell her that she deserves better than someone who sees her as an option rather than a priority. It took me 20 years to learn those lessons, but I'm grateful I learned them at all. Better late than never, as they say, and who knows? Maybe the next chapter of my life will be the best one yet. I was 24 and thought I had my life figured out. Lucas and I had been together for 6.5 years, more than a quarter of my entire life. We'd met when I was an undergraduate and he was working his first job after college. What started as a casual campus romance had evolved into something I believed was permanent, unshakable, the kind of love story I'd always dreamed of having. Lucas was 27 now, 3 years older than me, and he'd always seemed so much more mature and worldly. When I got accepted into graduate school in a new city, he didn't hesitate to move with me. "We're a team," he'd said. "Where you go, I go." That gesture felt like the ultimate romantic commitment. He'd left his job, his friends, his entire support system to follow me to a place where neither of us knew anyone. It was proof, I thought, of how much he loved me and how serious he was about our future together. We found a small apartment near campus, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We adopted 2 cats from the local shelter, Mochi and Boba, both orange tabbies who became our children in that way that young couples without kids do. We talked about our future constantly, marriage, real careers, maybe actual children someday, growing old together. In January of 2023, he proposed. Nothing elaborate, just the 2 of us in our living room on a random Tuesday evening with our cats purring on the couch beside us. "I can't imagine my life without you," he'd said as he got down on one knee with a simple but beautiful ring he'd been saving up for. "Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. Of course I said yes. Lucas was my everything. my partner, my best friend, my safe harbor in a world that often felt chaotic and overwhelming. We started planning our wedding for the following year, looking at venues and making guest lists and dreaming about the life we'd build together. Everything felt perfect, which should have been my first warning sign. Lucas started his new job at a tech startup downtown in March, about 2 months after our engagement. He was excited about the opportunity. It was a step up from his previous position, and the company had a young, energetic culture that appealed to him. It was there that he met Brooke. He started mentioning her casually in his daily work stories. Brooke had this great idea in the meeting today. Brooke and I grabbed lunch to discuss the project. You'd really like Brooke. She's got your sense of humor. I was happy that Lucas was making friends at his new job. He'd been a bit lonely since we'd moved to the city, and I knew how important it was for him to have social connections outside of our relationship. When he asked if he could invite Brooke to hang out with us sometime, I enthusiastically agreed. The first time I met Brooke, I understood immediately why Lucas liked her. She was 20 years old, bubbly and energetic in that way that comes with being young and optimistic about the world. She had short blonde hair, bright green eyes, and the kind of infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was also beautiful in an effortless way that made me acutely aware of my own insecurities. I'd always been reasonably confident about my appearance, but something about Brooke's youth and vitality made me feel older and more settled than my 24 years should have warranted. But despite that initial twinge of insecurity, I genuinely liked her. She was funny, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. She asked thoughtful questions about my graduate program and shared stories about her own life with a vulnerability that felt authentic. The three of us started hanging out regularly, dinners at our apartment, movies, weekend outings to local festivals and farmers markets. It felt like we were building a real friendship, the kind of adult social circle I'd always imagined having. Everything changed in June, right before Lucas and I were supposed to leave for a week-long vacation we'd been planning for months. We were both stressed from work and school, and I was looking forward to some time to reconnect and relax together. Instead, Lucas chose that moment to detonate a bomb in our relationship. It started as an argument about something trivial. I can't even remember what now. But Lucas escalated it in a way that felt disproportionate and deliberate, like he was picking a fight for reasons I couldn't understand. Finally, in the middle of our apartment, with our suitcases half-packed, he dropped the real issue. "I've been thinking," he said, pacing back and forth in our living room. "I think I might be polyamorous." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "I've been reading about it, doing research. I think I need to explore relationships with other people, or I might have to leave at some point." I sat down heavily on our couch, trying to process what he was saying. "You want to see other people?" "I want to explore what polyamory might look like for us," he said, his voice taking on the careful tone of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "I think it could actually strengthen our relationship if we were both free to connect with others." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. We were engaged. We'd been together for over 6 years. We'd built a life together, made plans for the future, adopted pets together, and now, a month before our vacation and less than a year before our wedding, he was telling me he wanted to date other people. "I'm monogamous, Lucas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know that. We've talked about this before." "I know," he said. "But maybe you could try being more open-minded. Maybe this could work for both of us." The vacation was a disaster. We spent most of it having the same circular conversation over and over again. Lucas insisted that polyamory was something he needed to explore, that he'd been feeling trapped and restless in our relationship. I tried to understand, tried to be supportive, but the whole concept felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built together. "If you love me," I finally said on our last night away, "why isn't that enough?" "It's not about you not being enough," he said. "It's about me needing to understand myself better." but it felt like it was about me not being enough. It felt like after 6.5 years, I'd failed to make him happy. When we got back from vacation, I was emotionally exhausted but determined to try to save our relationship. The alternative, losing Lucas, losing our life together, starting over at 24, felt impossible to contemplate. What if we tried something limited? I suggested during one of our many late-night conversations. What if we explored this with someone we both trust? The someone I had in mind was Brooke. I'm bisexual, though I'd never really explored that side of my sexuality in depth. Brooke was someone I genuinely cared about, someone who already felt like family. If I was going to try to be okay with Lucas being with someone else, maybe it would be easier if that someone was a person I could also have a connection with. Lucas seemed surprised but pleased by my suggestion. You'd be okay with that? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try if it means we can stay together. We approached Brooke about it carefully, not wanting to pressure her or make her feel like we were taking advantage of her gratitude for our help during her crisis. But she seemed interested, even excited about the possibility. I care about both of you so much, she said. If this is something that could make you both happy, I'd like to explore it. I established some ground rules that felt important to me. Most crucially, nothing sexual should happen between Lucas and Brooke when I wasn't present. If we were going to try this polyamorous thing, I wanted it to be truly inclusive, not just Lucas getting permission to cheat while I watched from the sidelines. For a few weeks, it actually seemed like it might work. The three of us spent time together, and there was definitely chemistry and affection between all of us. I was surprised by how natural it felt to be physically intimate with Brooke, and seeing Lucas happy seemed to ease some of my anxiety about the whole arrangement, but I was naive about polyamory, about human nature, and about the people I was trusting with my heart. It started with small things. Lucas began spending more and more time with Brooke outside of our group activities. When I'd ask about their time together, he'd be vague or defensive. We're just getting to know each other better, he'd say. Isn't that what you wanted? But it wasn't what I'd wanted. What I'd wanted was for the three of us to explore this together, as equals, with transparency and communication. What was happening felt more like Lucas was using our arrangement as permission to have a separate relationship with Brooke that I wasn't really a part of. The first major red flag came when I went out of town for a weekend to visit some college friends. It was a trip I'd been looking forward to, a chance to see old friends and have some space to process everything that had been happening in my relationship. While I was gone, Lucas and Brooke spent the entire weekend together. When I asked what they'd done, Lucas was evasive. We just hung out, he said, watched movies, talked, but something felt off. There was an intimacy between them when I got back, a shared sense of having experienced something together that didn't include me. They had inside jokes I didn't understand and references to conversations I hadn't been part of. My anxiety spiked, but when I tried to talk to Lucas about it, he dismissed my concerns. Nothing happened, he said. You're being paranoid. But I wasn't being paranoid. I was being observant. And what I was observing was that the relationship between Lucas and Brooke was developing in ways that went far beyond what we'd agreed to. My anxiety about what had happened during my weekend away became overwhelming. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on my graduate work. I kept having this gnawing feeling that Lucas had crossed boundaries we'd established, but I had no proof. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had a complete breakdown, sobbing in our living room while Lucas sat there looking annoyed rather than concerned. Did something happen while I was gone? I asked through my tears. Did you break our agreement? Lucas exploded. I can't believe you're accusing me of cheating, he said, his voice cold and angry. After everything I've done to be honest with you about what I need, after all the compromises we've made, you still don't trust me. I'm not accusing you of cheating, I said. I'm asking if you followed the rules we agreed on. The fact that you're even asking that question shows how little you trust me, he said. I'm hurt, Emma. I'm really hurt that you would think so little of me. The gaslighting was masterful. Somehow, my legitimate concerns about boundary violations had been turned into me being the bad guy for not trusting him enough. Lucas barely spoke to me for a week after that conversation, treating me like I'd wronged him terribly. I found myself apologizing for having feelings, for being anxious, for asking questions about my own relationship. The power dynamic between us had shifted completely. I was now the one constantly trying to prove that I was trustworthy, that I was supportive enough, that I deserved to be included in decisions about our relationship. Chapter 8, The Discovery. A week after our fight, I couldn't sleep. Lucas was next to me in bed, his phone charging on his nightstand like always. We'd always had an open phone policy. We both knew each other's passcodes and had standing permission to use each other's devices. Something compelled me to look through his messages with Brooke. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was just the desperate need to know if I was going crazy or if my concerns were valid. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. There were dozens of sexually explicit messages between Lucas and Brooke, many of them sent while I was in the same room. They'd been sexting while we watched movies together, while we had dinner, while I was sitting right there completely unaware of what was happening. The messages weren't just sexual. They were intimate in a way that made it clear their relationship had evolved far beyond anything we'd agreed to. They talked about feelings for each other, about how difficult it was to pretend things were casual when I was around, about how they wished they could spend more time alone together. One message from Brooke particularly stung. I hate having to share you with her. I know she was there first, but sometimes I wish it was just us. Lucas had responded, I know, baby. Soon we won't have to worry about it so much. Soon we won't have to worry about it so much. The implication was clear. They were planning a future that didn't include me, while using our agreed-upon arrangement as cover for what was essentially an affair. I took screenshots of the most damning messages and woke Lucas up. My hands were shaking as I showed him the evidence of his betrayal. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've been lying to me for weeks. Lucas looked at the screenshots, and for a moment, I saw something like shame cross his face. But it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. You went through my phone, he said. You gave me permission to use your phone, I reminded him. And that's not the point. The point is that you broke every rule we agreed on. The rules were too restrictive, he said. They weren't realistic. Then you should have talked to me about changing them, not just violated them behind my back. I knew you'd say no. So you decided to just do whatever you wanted anyway. Lucas was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe we could work through this. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe we could figure out how to rebuild trust. Instead, he said, I think I should move out. What followed was the most emotionally devastating month of my life. Lucas said he was moving out, but the process dragged on endlessly. He seemed to be in no hurry to actually leave, despite having supposedly made the decision to end our relationship. During this time, he continued sleeping in our bed, the bed we'd shared for over 2 years, the bed where we'd gotten engaged, the bed where I now lay awake at night wondering how everything had gone so wrong. He also continued seeing Brooke, often bringing her to our apartment or going to her place for hours at a time. When I asked him to please not have her in our shared space while we were trying to figure out our relationship, he dismissed my request. We're friends, he said. I'm not going to stop seeing my friend because you're jealous. Jealous? As if my discomfort with his affair partner being in our home was just petty jealousy rather than a reasonable boundary during an incredibly difficult time. I was paying for the apartment we could no longer afford on my graduate student stipend alone. I was taking care of our cats, who kept looking for Lucas when he didn't come home, and I was trying to maintain my academic performance while my personal life imploded around me. Meanwhile, Lucas seemed to be enjoying the best of both worlds. He had Brooke for romance and excitement, and he had me handling all the practical responsibilities of the life we'd built together. I'd been trying to maintain some kind of friendship with Brooke throughout this nightmare. Despite everything, I still cared about her and hoped we could preserve some kind of relationship even if my romantic relationship with Lucas was ending. That hope was shattered when Brooke finally showed me who she really was. It started with small comments, little digs about my appearance, my personality, my relationship with Lucas. "You're so serious all the time," she'd say. "Lucas needs someone who can be more fun." Then came the more direct attacks. She told me I was controlling, that I'd been holding Lucas back, that he was much happier now that he was free to be himself. The final blow came when she decided she was done pretending to be civil. She sent me a series of text messages that were so vicious they took my breath away. "You're pathetic," she wrote. "Watching you cling to Lucas is embarrassing. He doesn't love you anymore. He loves me. He's only staying because he feels sorry for you." "You're a horrible person," she continued. "Selfish and manipulative. You tried to use me to keep your boyfriend interested, and now you're angry that it backfired." She posted vague but clearly targeted comments on social media, talking about toxic people and fake friends in ways that anyone who knew our situation would understand were about me. Then she blocked me on everything. Social media, phone, email. Just like that, the person I'd considered one of my closest friends disappeared from my life entirely. Finally, after a month of emotional torture, Lucas actually started the process of moving out. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt empty and confused. The worst part was that I found myself helping him, even after everything he'd put me through. Even after the lies and the emotional manipulation and the complete disregard for my feelings, I was packing his belongings and loading them into his car. I'd injured my back a few days earlier, a stress-related muscle spasm that left me barely able to walk, but I still helped carry boxes because I wanted this nightmare to end. Brooke was there during the move, directing traffic and acting like she belonged there. She didn't acknowledge me except to give me looks of barely concealed contempt. Watching her in the apartment we'd all spent so much time in together, seeing her casual ownership of the space, was like watching someone else's life through a window. When Lucas left for the last time, taking the final load of his belongings, I stood in our empty apartment with our confused cats and tried to figure out what came next. A few days after Lucas moved out, I realized he'd forgotten some important documents, tax papers, insurance information, things he'd need for practical adult life. Despite everything that had happened, I still cared enough about him to want him to have his important paperwork. I drove to his new apartment, a place I'd never seen before, and knocked on the door. Brooke answered, wearing one of Lucas's t-shirts and looking like she belonged there. "What do you want?" she asked, not bothering to hide her hostility. "I have some of Lucas's documents," I said, holding up the envelope. "He'll need these." Lucas appeared behind her, and his face hardened when he saw me. "I told you not to come here," he said. "I just wanted to give you your tax papers," I said, confused by his reaction. "I thought you'd need them." "I don't want you coming to my apartment," he said firmly. "From now on, we're no contact. Don't call, don't text, don't show up here. I'm done." No contact. After 6.5 years together, after an engagement, after building a life together, he wanted no contact. I handed him the envelope and walked back to my car, trying not to cry until I was safely out of sight. In the space of 2 months, I'd lost my fiancé, my best friend, and any sense of who I was supposed to be now. The months that followed were the darkest period of my life. I was living in an apartment I couldn't afford on my graduate student stipend, but I couldn't move because my cats needed stability, and I needed to stay close to campus for my program. I barely ate because groceries were expensive and I had no appetite anyway. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and my friends started commenting on how gaunt I looked. Mochi and Boba, our cats, kept looking for Lucas. They'd sit by the door in the evening when he usually came home from work, or search the apartment like they were sure he must be hiding somewhere. I tried to explain to them what had happened, but they just looked at me with confused golden eyes that broke my heart. I'd lost more than just a boyfriend. I'd lost the family we'd created together, the future we'd planned, the sense of security that comes from having a partner in life. At 24, I felt like I was starting over from nothing. My graduate work suffered. I could barely concentrate in classes, and my research felt meaningless in the face of everything I was dealing with personally. My advisor noticed and gently suggested I consider taking a leave of absence, but I couldn't afford to delay my graduation any longer than necessary. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake in our bed, my bed now, replaying conversations and wondering what I could have done differently. The silence in the apartment was deafening after years of sharing space with Lucas and having our cat's father around. After about 3 months of isolation, my friends started encouraging me to try dating again. "You need to get back out there," my friend Sarah said. "Not every guy is going to be like Lucas." I knew she was right, intellectually, but the idea of trusting someone new, of being vulnerable with another person, felt impossible. I reluctantly agreed to go on a date with a guy named Mike who Sarah had met through work. He seemed nice enough, kind, stable, genuinely interested in getting to know me. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have been attracted to him, but I felt nothing. During dinner, I kept analyzing everything he said, looking for signs that he might be lying or manipulating me. When he complimented my appearance, I wondered if he was love-bombing me. When he asked about my graduate program, I questioned whether he was genuinely interested or just trying to seem supportive. "You seem really guarded," Mike said gently toward the end of the evening. "Are you okay?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that I'd been emotionally destroyed by someone I'd trusted completely, that I was terrified of opening my heart to anyone new, that I barely felt like a whole person anymore. Instead, I just said I was going through a difficult time and probably wasn't ready to date yet. Mike was understanding, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He was a good guy looking for a real connection, and I was too broken to give him what he deserved. I didn't go on any more dates after that. It seemed unfair to inflict my damage on unsuspecting men who hadn't done anything wrong. Eventually, I realized I needed professional help to process what had happened to me. I found a therapist who specialized in relationship trauma and manipulation, and slowly started unpacking the psychological damage Lucas and Brooke had inflicted. "What you experienced was a form of emotional abuse," Dr. Martinez told me during one of our early sessions. "Your partner used your love and trust against you, manipulated you into accepting a situation that violated your boundaries, and then gaslit you when you tried to address your concerns." "But I agreed to the polyamory thing," I said. "I made the choice to try it." "Under duress," she pointed out. "He essentially told you that he would leave if you didn't agree to his demands. That's coercion, not consensual exploration. It took months of therapy for me to understand the full extent of what had been done to me. Lucas hadn't just cheated. He'd systematically broken down my sense of reality, my trust in my own perceptions, and my belief that I deserved to be treated with respect." The introduction of Brooke into our relationship hadn't been about exploration or growth. It had been about Lucas wanting permission to cheat while making me complicit in my own betrayal. Healthy polyamory is based on complete honesty, respect for all parties involved, and genuine care for everyone's well-being, Dr. Martinez explained. "What you experienced was just infidelity with extra steps. One of the hardest parts of moving on was seeing Lucas and Brooke's relationship play out on social media. Even though Brooke had blocked me, mutual friends would occasionally mention seeing their posts, and I'd inevitably find myself looking them up on platforms where I wasn't blocked. They looked happy. Disgustingly, perfectly happy? Lucas posted photos of elaborate date nights and weekend getaways, the kind of romantic gestures he'd stopped making for me years before he'd asked for permission to see other people. Brooke posted constant couple photos with captions about finding your person and, when you know, you know. The irony was sickening. She'd found her person by stealing someone else's. They moved in together officially about 6 months after Lucas left our apartment. I saw the photos of their housewarming party, surrounded by friends and coworkers who had no idea how their relationship had started. The worst part was seeing how quickly they'd moved on, how easily they'd transitioned from destroying my life to building their own perfect romance. While I was struggling to afford groceries and crying myself to sleep every night, they were playing house and acting like they'd found true love. Don't look at their social media, Dr. Martinez advised. It's only hurting you, and it's not giving you accurate information anyway. Social media is performative. People only show what they want others to see. She was right, but it was addictive in the way that picking at a wound is addictive. I knew it was bad for me, but I couldn't seem to stop. The practical challenges of my new life were almost as difficult as the emotional ones. Lucas and I had split expenses based on our incomes. He'd made significantly more than my graduate student stipend, so he paid about 2/3 of our shared costs. Now I was responsible for rent, utilities, internet, cat food, and all the other expenses of adult life on my student income alone. Even with a part-time tutoring job, I was barely making ends meet. I applied for emergency financial aid through my graduate program and picked up additional tutoring clients wherever I could find them. I started shopping at food banks and buying generic everything. I canceled streaming services, stopped buying coffee out, and wore the same few outfits over and over because I couldn't afford new clothes. The cats needed veterinary care that I couldn't afford, but I couldn't bear the thought of giving them up. They were the only family I had left, the only connection to the life I'd built with Lucas. I put their vet bills on a credit card I couldn't pay off and tried not to think about the debt accumulating. My parents lived across the country and were dealing with their own financial struggles. My dad had been laid off recently, and they were in no position to help me even if I'd been comfortable asking. I felt trapped. I couldn't afford to stay in the apartment, but I couldn't afford to move either. Moving costs, deposits, and the logistics of relocating while maintaining my graduate program seemed impossible to manage. About 8 months after Lucas left, I started to gain some perspective on what had actually happened to our relationship. Through therapy, conversations with friends, and my own reflection, I began to see patterns I'd missed while I was living through the experience. Lucas had been emotionally checked out of our relationship long before he'd brought up polyamory. The signs had been there: less affection, fewer shared activities, a growing sense that we were roommates rather than romantic partners. But instead of being honest about his feelings or working with me to address our relationship issues, he'd chosen to pursue someone else while using me as emotional and financial support. The polyamory conversation hadn't been about exploration or personal growth. It had been about Lucas wanting to have his cake and eat it too. He'd wanted the security and stability I provided while also having the excitement of a new relationship with someone younger and less complicated. He was already having an emotional affair with Brooke before he ever talked to you about polyamory, Dr. Martinez pointed out. The arrangement you agreed to was just retroactive permission for something that was already happening. I realized that Lucas had never intended for our polyamorous experiment to be equitable. He'd probably assumed that I'd be uncomfortable with the physical aspects and would eventually bow out, leaving him free to pursue Brooke while keeping me as a backup plan. When I'd surprised him by actually trying to make it work, he'd simply decided to ignore the boundaries we'd established and do whatever he wanted anyway. Recovery wasn't linear. I'd have good days where I felt strong and optimistic about my future, followed by terrible days where I could barely get out of bed. But gradually, with therapy and time, I started to rebuild my sense of self. I remembered who I'd been before Lucas. before I defined myself entirely in relation to another person. I threw myself into my graduate work with renewed focus. My research project, examining power dynamics in relationships, suddenly felt deeply personal and important. I channeled my pain into academic achievement, and my grades improved dramatically. I started exercising again, something I'd neglected during the worst of my depression. I couldn't afford a gym membership, but I could walk around campus and do yoga videos in my apartment. Physical activity helped with my mental health in ways that surprised me. I began rebuilding my social circle, reaching out to classmates and colleagues I'd lost touch with during my relationship with Lucas. I'd isolated myself so much during those 6 years, focusing all my social energy on Lucas and our small circle of friends. Slowly, I started to remember that I was interesting and valuable as an individual, not just as half of a couple. A year after the breakup, I was finally able to see my relationship with Lucas clearly. What I'd thought was a great love story had actually been a slow erosion of my independence and self-worth. Lucas had been a master manipulator, skilled at making me feel like his needs and feelings were more important than mine. He'd trained me to prioritize his happiness over my own well-being, to question my own perceptions when they conflicted with his narrative. The polyamory situation had just been the final, most dramatic example of a pattern that had been present throughout our relationship. Lucas would present me with impossible choices, agree to what he wanted, or lose him, and I'd consistently chosen to sacrifice my own comfort and values to keep him happy. You were in a relationship with someone who saw you as a resource rather than a person, Dr. Martinez observed. Someone who was willing to use your love against you to get what he wanted. I started to understand that the relationship ending wasn't a failure on my part. It was an inevitable result of being with someone who didn't actually value me as an equal partner. The fact that Lucas had moved on so quickly with Brooke wasn't proof that what we'd had wasn't real or important. It was proof that he'd already moved on emotionally, long before he'd moved on physically. By the time I was approaching the second anniversary of Lucas leaving, I was a completely different person than I'd been at the start of that nightmare. I'd finished my graduate program with honors and found a job in my field that paid well enough for me to finally feel financially secure. I'd moved to a smaller but more affordable apartment that felt like home in a way our shared space never had. I'd developed a strong support network of friends who knew my story and supported my healing journey. I'd learned to advocate for myself, to set boundaries, and to trust my own perceptions, even when others tried to undermine them. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was complete on my own. I didn't need a romantic partner to validate my worth or give my life meaning. If I chose to be in a relationship again someday, it would be because I wanted to share my already full life with someone, not because I needed them to complete me. 2 years after Lucas left, I ran into him at a coffee shop near campus. I was there grading papers, something I'd always done alone, and he was there with a friend I didn't recognize. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. He'd gained weight and lost some hair, and there was something in his expression that seemed less confident than the man who'd left me for a younger woman. When he saw me, he hesitated, clearly debating whether to approach. Finally, he walked over to my table. "Hi, Emma," he said quietly. "Hi, Lucas." "You look good," he said. "Happy?" "I'm happy," I replied. And it was true. "I heard you got a job at the Research Institute. Congratulations." "Thank you." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. I could see him struggling with whether to say more, whether to try to explain or apologize, or justify what he'd done. "I should let you get back to your work," he said finally. "Okay." As he walked away, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing for what we'd once had. He'd become what he should have been all along, a stranger who had briefly been part of my life, and then left. About 6 months after that coffee shop encounter, I heard through the academic grapevine that Lucas and Brooke had broken up. Apparently, their perfect romance hadn't been so perfect after all. My friend Sarah, who still had mutual connections with people from Lucas's workplace, filled me in on the details over dinner one evening. Apparently, Brooke cheated on him, Sarah said, barely suppressing a smirk, with some guy she met at the gym. Lucas found out the same way you did. Suspicious behavior, checking her phone, the whole thing. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I just felt sad for both of them. They had destroyed my life to be together, and it hadn't even lasted 3 years. The irony is incredible, Sarah continued. According to Mike, you remember Mike from Lucas's office? Lucas was devastated. He couldn't understand how someone could betray his trust like that. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. Lucas had experienced exactly what he'd put me through, but apparently couldn't see the parallel. He tried to make it work with her, Sarah went on. Went to couples therapy, begged her to end things with the other guy, the whole 9 yards. But she wasn't interested in fixing things. So Brooke had done to Lucas what Lucas had done to me, except she'd been more honest about not wanting to work things out. In a twisted way, I respected her for that. 3 years after my life imploded, I met David. Not through dating apps or setups from friends, but organically, the way relationships are supposed to start. He was a librarian at the Research Institute where I'd gotten my job, and we'd been having friendly conversations for months before either of us realized we were attracted to each other. He was kind, intelligent, and had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh even on difficult days. What struck me most about David was his consistency. He said what he meant and meant what he said. When he made plans, he kept them. When he said he'd call, he called. After years of Lucas's emotional inconsistency and manipulation, David's straightforwardness felt revolutionary. Our first few dates were careful, gentle affairs. David knew I'd been through a difficult relationship in the past. I'd been vague about the details, and he was patient with my guardedness. I'm not in a rush, he told me after our third date when I apologized for being slow to open up. I'd rather take the time to build something real than rush into something that might not last. The concept of someone being willing to wait to let me set the pace was foreign to me. Lucas had always pushed for more commitment, more accommodation, more acceptance of behavior that made me uncomfortable. David, by contrast, seemed content to let our relationship develop naturally. He never pressured me for physical intimacy, never demanded to know where I was or what I was doing, never made me feel like I had to choose between my own needs and his. Learning to trust David was a slow process. I found myself analyzing his behavior for signs of deception, waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting him to reveal himself as another manipulator, but David was remarkably patient with my hypervigilance. When I asked to see his phone one evening, a request born from trauma rather than any real suspicion, he handed it over without a question. I don't have anything to hide, he said simply. And if looking through my messages helps you feel more secure, then look through my messages. I didn't actually look through his phone that night. Just knowing that he was willing to be transparent was enough. We talked extensively about our past relationships, and David shared his own experiences with being manipulated by an ex-girlfriend who'd used emotional blackmail to control his behavior. She used to threaten to hurt herself if I didn't do what she wanted, he told me. It took me years to realize that someone who loves you doesn't use your care for them as a weapon. David understood, in a way that felt deeply healing, what it was like to have your love weaponized against you. David and I had been together for 2 years when he proposed, not with grand gestures or surprise parties, but with a conversation about our future that naturally led to the question of marriage. I want to spend my life with you, he said one evening as we sat on his couch with my cats purring between us. Not because I need you to complete me, but because I genuinely enjoy the life we've built together and want to keep building it. The proposal itself was simple but perfect. No pressure, no ultimatums, no sense that I had to say yes to keep him in my life. Just an honest expression of his feelings and a question about whether I felt the same way, I did. For the first time since Lucas left, I felt ready to make that kind of commitment to another person. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. We planned a small wedding with close friends and family. Nothing elaborate. We were both more interested in the marriage than the wedding, but meaningful and personal. The night before our wedding, as I was getting ready for bed in the hotel room where I was staying with my maid of honor, I thought about how different this felt from my engagement to Lucas. With Lucas, I'd been anxious about the future, worried about whether we were making the right decision, constantly seeking reassurance that he really wanted to marry me. With David, I felt calm and certain. We weren't getting married because we were afraid of losing each other or because we felt like we should take the next step. We were getting married because we'd already built something beautiful together and wanted to make it official. Our wedding day was small, but perfect. David's family, my family, and about 30 of our closest friends gathered in a botanical garden for a simple ceremony that focused on the promises we were making to each other. As I walked down the aisle, the garden path, I felt none of the anxiety or doubt that had plagued my first engagement. I felt peaceful, happy, and completely certain that I was making the right choice. David's vows were everything I'd never known I wanted to hear. He promised to love me as I was, not as he wanted me to be. He promised to communicate honestly, even when it was difficult. He promised to respect my autonomy and never ask me to compromise my values for his comfort. My own vows focused on the lessons I'd learned from my past relationship. I promised to trust David with my whole heart while also maintaining my own sense of self. I promised to communicate my needs clearly instead of expecting him to read my mind. I promised to choose love every day, not out of fear of being alone, but out of genuine appreciation for who he was. When we kissed at the end of the ceremony, I felt like I was finally home. Marriage to David was everything marriage to Lucas hadn't been. We were partners in the truest sense, sharing responsibilities, making decisions together, supporting each other's individual goals and dreams. David encouraged my career, ambitions in ways Lucas never had. When I expressed interest in pursuing additional certifications that would require evening classes, David didn't complain about the time commitment or make me feel guilty for prioritizing my professional development. "Your success is our success," he said simply. "And even if it weren't, you deserve to pursue what makes you happy." We bought a house together, a real partnership where we both contributed to the down payment and both had our names on the mortgage. We adopted another cat, a black and white tuxedo named Oreo who got along perfectly with Mochi and Boba. But perhaps most importantly, David and I had learned to fight well. When we disagreed about something, and we did disagree, because we were two different people with different perspectives, we addressed the issue directly instead of letting resentment build. We never threatened to leave each other during arguments. We never used each other's vulnerabilities as weapons. We worked through problems as a team, with the understanding that our relationship was something we both wanted to protect and strengthen. 5 years after Lucas left and 2 years into my marriage with David, I was grocery shopping when I ran into Brooke in the cereal aisle. She looked different, older, more tired, with the kind of stress lines that come from difficult life experiences. She saw me at the same time I saw her, and for a moment we both froze. "Emma," she said finally. "Brooke." We stood there awkwardly for a moment before she spoke again. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Actually, I owe you a lot of apologies." I was surprised by the admission. The Brooke I remembered wouldn't have apologized for anything. What happened between Lucas and me, the way it happened. I was young and stupid, and I didn't think about how much we were hurting you. "You were 20, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "We all make mistakes when we're young. That's generous of you to say, but it was more than a mistake. It was cruel. The things I said to you, the way I treated you, I'm ashamed of who I was then. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. What changed? I asked. Life, she said with a rueful smile. Growing up, getting my heart broken, realizing that karma is real. I heard about you and Lucas. Yeah, well, turns out people who cheat with you will cheat on you. Who could have predicted that? Despite everything, I almost smiled at her sarcasm. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how terrible we were to you, and I'm sorry. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. We were all different people then. Are you happy now? She asked hesitantly. Very, I said. I'm married to someone wonderful, and I have a career I love. It all worked out the way it was supposed to. I'm glad, she said, and seemed to mean it. You deserve better than what we gave you. That encounter with Brooke stayed with me for weeks afterward, not because it reopened old wounds, but because it felt like the final piece of closure I hadn't known I needed. I told David about running into her, and he listened thoughtfully as I processed the experience. How do you feel about her apology? He asked. Good, I think. It doesn't change what happened, but it's nice to know that she understands the impact of her actions. Do you think she was sincere? I think so. She seemed different, more mature, more aware of how her choices affect other people. Growth is possible for everyone, David said, even people who hurt us. That evening, I found myself thinking about the journey I'd taken from that devastated 24-year-old who couldn't afford groceries to the confident, happily married woman I was now. The pain Lucas and Brooke had caused me was real and significant, but it had also been transformative. It had forced me to develop strength I didn't know I possessed, to learn to value myself independently of what others thought of me, and to understand what I actually wanted in a relationship. Without that devastating experience, I might never have developed the emotional intelligence to recognize and appreciate someone like David. I might have settled for less than I deserved, or repeated the same patterns that had made my relationship with Lucas so unhealthy. 6 years after Lucas left, I was giving a presentation at a conference about emotional manipulation in relationships. My research had grown out of my personal experience, but it had expanded to encompass broader patterns of how people use love and trust as tools of control. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. Everything you described, it's exactly what's happening in my relationship. I thought I was going crazy. We talked for almost an hour about her situation, a boyfriend who had gradually isolated her from friends and family, who made her question her own perceptions, who used her love for him to justify increasingly controlling behavior. What should I do? She asked. Trust yourself, I told her. Your feelings are valid. Your concerns are real. You deserve to be in a relationship that makes you feel safe and valued, not confused and diminished. But I love him. I know. And that love is real and valuable. But love alone isn't enough to make a relationship healthy. You also need respect, trust, honesty, and equality. Helping other people recognize and escape emotional manipulation had become part of my mission. I couldn't undo what had happened to me, but I could use my experience to help others avoid similar situations or find the strength to leave them. I had been dating Devin for 7 months when I decided to bring him to our family reunion. We'd found a cluster of cabins at a lake in northern Georgia, and I was excited to share this part of my life with him. My mother, Patricia, and I have always had a complicated relationship. We're only 21 years apart. She likes younger men. I prefer older ones. We'd established boundaries after some awkward incidents, and they'd worked well. Devin had met Mom once before at a family dinner, along with my siblings Marcus and Jade. Nothing unusual, no red flags. Mom was dating Frank for about a year and a half, but he couldn't attend the reunion due to work. The reunion was supposed to be perfect. Me, Devin, my 3-year-old son Tyler, and about 30 relatives coming together for the weekend. Tyler was excited about swimming and seeing his cousins. If only I'd known what was really planned. We arrived Friday afternoon, and I noticed Devin was quieter than usual during the drive. I attributed it to nerves about meeting so many new people. The cabin setup was perfect. 4 large cabins around a fire pit, with a few RVs for overflow. Mom had claimed an RV for herself, saying she needed quiet space. The first evening went well. Tyler was in heaven with all the attention from relatives, and Devin seemed to be settling in okay. Mom was her usual charming self, including Devin in conversations, laughing at his jokes. Saturday morning at the lake, Devin found every excuse not to join us swimming. He helped with lunch prep, organized card games, drove to town for ice, anything but spend time with me and Tyler. By Saturday afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was definitely wrong. An hour before the big Saturday dinner, Devin finally told me what was really happening. I found him on our cabin deck, staring at the lake with a cold expression I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, and my stomach dropped. Then he started listing my flaws like reading a grocery list. I was too tall at 5 feet 11 inches, not fit enough despite weighing 150 pounds. Tyler was exhausting, and there would always be complications with his father. I smoked too much weed, maybe once a month. These weren't legitimate concerns. They were cruel, deliberately hurtful excuses designed to destroy my self-esteem. "If you felt this way, why didn't you say something before?" I asked. He shrugged. "I was hoping my feelings would change. They didn't." The argument escalated quickly. I couldn't believe the timing. At my family reunion, 3 hours from home, in front of everyone. "You know what?" I finally said. "If that's how you feel, we're done. But you're stuck here until tomorrow." Devin stormed off toward the main cabin area, leaving me alone trying to figure out how to get through the rest of the weekend. After 10 minutes of crying, I decided to do what I always did when overwhelmed: find my mom. I walked to her RV, knocked softly, and tried the unlocked door. "Mom, I really need to..." And that's when I saw them. Devin and my mother naked, sprawled across the RV's bed, both clearly post-orgasm. For a moment, none of us moved. Then they scrambled to cover themselves, panic in their eyes. Without thinking, I stepped forward and slapped her across the face as hard as I could. "You fucking bitch," I said, my voice deadly calm. Then I walked out, leaving them scrambling to get dressed. As I walked back toward the cabins, more family members were arriving for the evening festivities. Everyone was laughing, happy, excited, while I had just discovered the most devastating betrayal of my life. I somehow managed to get through dinner, avoiding meaningful conversation and mumbling excuses about Devin not feeling well when people asked. Mom showed up halfway through, acting completely normal, but I could see the red mark on her cheek barely covered by makeup. Tyler was my saving grace. Focusing on his needs kept me functional. After dinner, I took him back to our cabin for bedtime, then sat in the dark trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't confront them with Tyler around and 30 relatives nearby, but I also couldn't just let this go. I didn't sleep at all. Every sound made me wonder if it was Devin or Mom trying to approach. Around 2 a.m., someone tried our door handle. It was locked, but they stood there for several minutes before walking away. I spent the pre-dawn hours thinking about my relationship with my mother. She was supposed to protect me, support me, have my back. Instead, she'd fucked my boyfriend less than an hour after he'd destroyed my self-esteem. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a fundamental violation of the most basic relationship in my life. As Tyler woke up, I put on my mom face, and prepared for one final day of pretending everything was normal. The last morning was torture. I packed methodically, throwing Devin's belongings into a separate bag to leave on the porch. Tyler's crankiness actually helped. I could focus on managing his mood and avoid adult conversations. Mom finally cornered me as I was loading the car. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we really don't." "It just happened," she said desperately. "He was upset about your fight, and I was trying to comfort him." "Bullshit! You made a choice? You both did?" I gave her an ultimatum. "Tell Frank what you did, or I will." Her face went white. "You wouldn't. Try me." I drove away without looking back, leaving her standing by my car looking stricken. The 3-hour drive home was the longest of my life. Back in Atlanta, I wrestled with whether to tell Frank. He deserved to know his girlfriend had cheated, but getting involved would prolong the nightmare. Friday evening, I made the call. Frank listened without interrupting as I told him everything. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "I know that couldn't have been easy. You didn't deserve this, Frank." "Neither did you? Are you okay?" His kindness almost made me cry again. "Not really, no." The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m., Mom screaming into voicemail that I'd ruined her life because Frank had broken up with her. 20 minutes later, she was pounding on my door, drunk and furious. I called 911, and the police arrested her for disorderly conduct. Tyler was traumatized by his grandmother screaming obscenities and trying to break down our door. Mom spent the night in jail and immediately violated the no-contact order by calling me 12 times and sending increasingly unhinged messages threatening to fight for visitation rights with Tyler. I hired a family attorney who explained that Georgia recognizes grandparents' rights in certain circumstances, but given Mom's recent arrest and erratic behavior, I had a strong case. "Document everything," Ms. Rodriguez advised, "and consider filing for a protective order." Meanwhile, at work, word was spreading about my breakup with Devin, who was apparently telling people I cheated on him. My colleague Mark warned me that Devin was spreading lies about me professionally. My siblings started questioning me, confused by Mom's claims that I was having a breakdown and keeping Tyler from her over a disagreement about a boyfriend. 3 weeks later, I was served with papers. Mom was officially petitioning for grandparents' visitation rights, claiming I was unfit and using Tyler as a weapon. The petition painted me as unstable and vindictive, with no mention of her infidelity or harassment. "This is textbook manipulation," Ms. Rodriguez said. "But court battles are expensive. Are you prepared?" I couldn't afford a prolonged battle, but I couldn't let Mom get access to Tyler either. As we prepared for court, Mom launched a campaign to destroy my reputation, contacting my daycare provider, employer, and landlord with lies about my mental instability. Mom systematically attacked every aspect of my stability. She told the daycare I was dangerous, called my landlord claiming I was involved in criminal activity, and contacted my coworkers saying I was a pathological liar. My supervisor had to address the workplace harassment, warning that HR might get involved if it continued. The final straw came when Mom was spotted sitting in her car outside Tyler's daycare for an hour, just watching. I filed for an emergency protective order, legally prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of us. But she continued violating it, driving past our apartment and convincing most of my extended family that I was having a mental breakdown. The custody hearing was a nightmare. Mom gave an Oscar-worthy performance as the concerned grandmother, claiming I'd violently attacked her and was keeping Tyler away out of spite. Her expensive attorney painted me as vindictive and unfit, while character witnesses, including my siblings and Tyler's pediatrician, testified about what a loving grandmother she seemed to be. When I tried to explain the truth, Mom's lawyer twisted every answer, dismissing my account as the product of emotional instability. The judge seemed skeptical of both sides and ruled for supervised visitation, one Saturday afternoon per month, with a court-appointed supervisor present. I felt devastated. It wasn't complete victory for Mom, but it wasn't the protection I'd hoped for either. A year later, Frank called with devastating news. He'd found messages on Mom's phone proving she and Devin had been having an affair for months before the reunion. The whole thing was planned, he said. The fight with Devin, the things he said to you, they needed an excuse for him to storm off. The screenshots he sent showed months of sexual exchanges and planning. One message from Mom made me sick. Poor Emma has no idea. She's so trusting, it's almost pathetic. They'd been laughing at me while orchestrating my emotional destruction. Ms. Rodriguez was furious when I showed her Frank's evidence. This proves premeditation and conspiracy, she said. We can definitely use this to modify custody. The new hearing was swift. Judge Martinez was appalled by the evidence of calculated manipulation. This court cannot allow unsupervised access to a child by someone capable of such behavior, she ruled. Supervised visitation was terminated immediately. Mom could send birthday cards, but all other contact was prohibited unless Tyler requested it at 18. My siblings, seeing the evidence, immediately cut contact with Mom. The family network she'd spent a year manipulating crumbled overnight. Learning the affair was premeditated was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it confirmed the conspiracy, liberating because it validated everything I'd felt. I can't believe I defended her, Marcus said after seeing the evidence. This is psychotic behavior. Tyler, now 5, barely remembered the chaos and was thriving, but I was still struggling with complex PTSD, hypervigilance, and an inability to trust anyone. I'd tried dating, but couldn't let anyone get close. The betrayal had fundamentally altered how I saw the world. 2 years later, I was still in therapy and had started a support group for family betrayal trauma. Meeting others who'd been abused by family members helped me feel less alone. People think family trauma should be easier to get over, said Maria, whose father had molested her. But it's actually harder because society expects you to forgive family no matter what. The group taught me that cutting toxic family members out wasn't cruel. It was self-preservation. Tyler was adjusting well with help from my siblings, who'd stepped up to fill the family void. He occasionally asked about Grandma, but without distress. I started dating Jake, a divorced father who understood trauma and didn't push for more intimacy than I could handle. It wasn't passionate, but it was honest and safe. Tyler, now 7, was happy and well-adjusted. When he asked if I missed having a mom, I told him he was all the family I needed. I take care of myself, I said. And you take care of me too. His love was uncomplicated and genuine in a way adult relationships weren't anymore. Maybe that was the lesson. Love shouldn't involve manipulation or hidden agendas. Jake and I married in a small ceremony with just our kids and close friends. No family drama, just 2 people who'd been hurt choosing to try again. I still saw Dr. Chen monthly. The hypervigilance had faded somewhat, but I'd never be the trusting person I was before. Mom had moved to Florida after losing her job and reputation. She sometimes drove by my neighborhood, but hadn't violated the protective order. She sent Tyler cards I saved, but didn't give to him. Devin had disappeared entirely after the truth came out, reportedly losing his job when the scandal became public knowledge. 5 years later, Tyler is 9 and stopped asking about Grandma years ago. Our small family doesn't seem unusual to him. He has friends with complicated family situations. I've reached genuine indifference about Mom's existence. She's not worth my anger or curiosity or forgiveness. The reunion was supposed to celebrate family connections. Instead, it ended my family as I knew it. But maybe some families are too toxic to preserve. Tyler, Jake, and I are a family now. Small, careful, but genuine. No hidden agendas, no calculated cruelties, no betrayals disguised as love. It's not the ending I would have chosen, but it's the one I've earned. Most days, that feels like enough. Tyler occasionally asks about the cards Grandma sends, and someday he'll decide if he wants contact. But for now, We're building something honest and stable, free from people who would hurt us for their own gratification. The betrayal changed me permanently. I'll never trust the way I did before. But maybe having realistic expectations about people's capacity for cruelty will protect us from future harm. We survived. We adapted. And sometimes, that's the best ending you can hope for. I was 16 when I met Dylan Martinez, and I thought he was everything I'd ever wanted in a boyfriend. He was 17, a year older than me, with dark hair that always looked perfectly messy and brown eyes that seemed to see right through me. Most importantly, he had that dangerous edge that made every other guy at our high school seem boring by comparison. Dylan sold weed. Not exactly a secret in our small town of Millbrook. Everyone knew he carried a small stash in his backpack and that if you needed something to make the weekend more interesting, Dylan was your guy. He wasn't a hardcore dealer or anything scary, just a teenager making some extra cash by selling to other teenagers. The danger he represented was mild, controlled, the kind of rebellion that felt thrilling without being genuinely frightening. Perfect for a 16-year-old girl who'd spent her entire life being the good daughter, the responsible student, the one who always followed the rules. I was a junior at Millbrook High, maintaining a solid 3.8 GPA while working part-time at the local ice cream shop. My biggest transgression before Dylan had been staying out 15 minutes past curfew. I lived with my parents in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street, helped with my younger sister's homework, and had never so much as tried alcohol. Dylan changed all of that. We met at a house party, my first house party, actually. My best friend Jessica had convinced me to go, swearing that it would be educational and that my parents never had to know. I'd been terrified and excited in equal measure, spending 2 hours getting ready and changing outfits 3 times. I was standing awkwardly by the kitchen counter, nursing a red Solo cup of beer that I was too nervous to actually drink, when Dylan appeared beside me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his voice warm and amused. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, embarrassed. "Only to someone who knows what to look for," he said. "I'm Dylan." Emma, he repeated, like he was testing how my name sounded. "Want to get some fresh air? This party's kind of lame anyway." I should have said no. I should have stayed with Jessica, finished my untouched beer, and gone home by midnight like I'd promised my parents. Instead, I followed Dylan outside, where we sat on the back porch and talked until the party was winding down. He was funny, charming, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. Dylan and I started dating 2 weeks after that party, though dating might be too formal a word for what we were doing. We'd meet up after school, hang out at the park, text constantly throughout the day. He'd pick me up in his beat-up Honda Civic, and we'd drive around town, listening to music and talking about everything and nothing. My parents were not thrilled about Dylan. They'd heard the rumors about his extracurricular business activities, and they made their disapproval clear from the start. "I don't like this boy," my mother said after Dylan picked me up for our 3rd date. "There's something about him that seems untrustworthy." "You don't even know him," I protested. "He's really sweet once you get to know him." "Sweet boys don't sell drugs, Emma." "It's just weed, Mom. It's not like he's some dangerous criminal." But my parents' disapproval only made Dylan more appealing. There's something intoxicating about forbidden love when you're 16, something that makes every stolen moment feel more precious and meaningful. Dylan seemed to understand this. He never pushed me to do anything I wasn't comfortable with, never made me feel bad for being inexperienced or naive. Instead, he made me feel special, like I was worth pursuing, despite being different from the girls he usually dated. "You're not like everyone else," he told me one afternoon as we sat in his car outside the movie theater. "Most girls our age are so fake, always trying to be someone they're not, but you're just real." I melted. At 16, being told you're real and different feels like the highest compliment imaginable. We'd been dating for about a month when Dylan first mentioned the apartment. My dad has this place downtown, Dylan said casually one Friday afternoon. It's way nicer than our house. Want to check it out? I was curious about Dylan's family situation. He lived with his mother and stepfather in a small ranch house on the outskirts of town, but he rarely talked about his biological father. I'd gathered that his parents were divorced and that his dad lived somewhere else, but Dylan was always vague about the details. Sure, I said. What kind of place is it? You'll see, he said with that mysterious smile that always made my stomach flutter. The apartment was in a new complex called Harbor View, about 15 minutes from our high school. It was the kind of modern, upscale development that was rare in our small town, all glass and steel and clean lines that made everything else in Millbrook look dated by comparison. Dylan led me to the elevator and pressed the button for the 5th floor. When we got to apartment 5B, he pulled out his phone and opened what looked like a note app. What's that? I asked. Door code, he said, typing numbers into the electronic lock. Way more convenient than keys. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the small downtown area and the lake beyond. The furniture was modern and expensive-looking, all white leather and chrome and glass. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they'd never been used. This is incredible, I said, walking around the open-concept living space. Your dad has great taste. Yeah, he's always been into modern stuff, Dylan said. He travels a lot for work, so he doesn't use it much. Sometimes I come here when I need to think or whatever. We spent the afternoon watching movies on the enormous flat-screen TV, curled up on the pristine white couch. Dylan was more relaxed there than I'd ever seen him, and I felt sophisticated and adult in a way that was new and intoxicating. We could come here more often, he suggested, as we were getting ready to leave. If you want, it's nice to have somewhere private to hang out. I agreed enthusiastically. The apartment became our special place, a sanctuary away from disapproving parents and curious classmates. Over the next 2 months, Dylan and I spent most of our free time at the apartment. We'd go there after school, on weekends, whenever we could slip away from our regular lives. It felt like playing house, like getting a glimpse of what adult life might be like. Dylan always had the code, always seemed comfortable and familiar with the space. He knew where everything was, knew which cabinet held the coffee mugs and where the spare blankets were stored. It felt natural, like this really was his family's place. We were careful not to mess anything up. Dylan was always reminding me to use coasters, to take my shoes off at the door, to make sure we left everything exactly as we found it. My dad's kind of anal about keeping things perfect, he explained. He doesn't like it when things are out of place. I was impressed by how responsible Dylan was about respecting his father's property. It seemed to contradict his bad boy image and made me feel like I was seeing a side of him that other people didn't get to see. During those afternoons at the apartment, I fell deeper in love with Dylan than I'd ever thought possible. We'd talk for hours about our dreams, our fears, our plans for after graduation. Dylan talked about maybe going to community college, possibly studying business or marketing. I told him about my plans to study psychology at the state university. We could get a place like this someday, he said one afternoon, as we lay on the couch watching the sunset through the huge windows. When we're older and have real jobs and stuff. You think we'll still be together when we're older? I asked. Why wouldn't we be? He said, pulling me closer. I love you, Emma. I know we're young, but I love you. It was the first time either of us had said those words. I said them back immediately, meaning them completely. For a brief, shining moment, I believed we were going to be together forever. The problem started small. Little things that I initially dismissed, but that, looking back, should have been red flags. Dylan became increasingly possessive. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was talking to, what I was doing when we weren't together. He'd get sulky if I made plans with Jessica, or if I had to work extra shifts at the ice cream shop. "I just miss you when you're not around," he said when I called him out on his behavior. "Is that so bad?" He also became more critical. Comments about my clothes, my hair, my friends, nothing harsh enough to qualify as abuse, but constant little digs that gradually eroded my confidence. "That shirt makes you look chunky," he said one day as we were getting ready to leave the apartment. "Maybe you should change." "You spend too much time with Jessica," he said another time. "She's a bad influence on you." I started second-guessing myself, changing my appearance and my behavior to keep Dylan happy. I told myself this was normal, that all couples went through adjustment periods. My grades started slipping. I was spending so much time with Dylan that I wasn't keeping up with homework and studying. My parents noticed and tried to impose restrictions on how much time I could spend with him, which only made me more determined to see him. "You're throwing your future away for some boy?" my mother said during one particularly heated argument. "This is not who you are, Emma." "You don't know who I am," I shot back. "You don't know anything about me or Dylan or what we have together." But deep down, I was starting to wonder if my mother might be right. By April, 6 months into our relationship, things between Dylan and me were strained. The possessiveness and criticism had gotten worse, and I was starting to feel suffocated. The apartment that had once felt like a romantic hideaway now felt like a prison where Dylan could monitor and control my every move. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon in late April. I'd gotten into the state university, my dream school, and had received a partial scholarship. I was ecstatic and couldn't wait to share the news with Dylan. His reaction was not what I'd expected. "So you're just going to abandon me?" he said when I showed him the acceptance letter. "You're going to run off to college and forget all about us?" "It's only 2 hours away," I said. "And it's not for another 4 months. We can make long-distance work." "No, we can't," he said flatly. "Long-distance relationships never work. You'll meet some college guy and dump me like I never mattered." "That's not true. I love you." "If you loved me, you wouldn't be planning to leave," he said. "If you really loved me, you'd stay here and we'd figure out a life together." I stared at him, realizing for the first time how different our visions of the future were. Dylan wasn't thinking about college or careers or growing as people. He was thinking about staying in our small town forever, maintaining the status quo. I'm 17 years old, Dylan," I said. "I can't plan my entire life around a high school relationship." The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. Not because they weren't true, but because of the look that crossed Dylan's face when I said them. "A high school relationship," he repeated slowly. "Is that all this is to you?" We didn't break up that day, but we both knew something fundamental had shifted. Over the next 2 weeks, we saw each other less frequently. Our conversations became stilted and awkward. The magic was gone, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that we wanted different things. I finally worked up the courage to end things on a Tuesday afternoon in early May. We were at the apartment, sitting on opposite ends of the white couch, barely talking. The silence had become oppressive. "I think we need to talk," I said, my heart pounding. Dylan looked at me with the expression I couldn't read. "About what?" "About us. About where this is going." "I thought we already established where this is going," he said. "You're going to college, and you're going to forget about me. It doesn't have to be like that." "Yes, it does," he said. "You made that clear when you called this a high school relationship." I took a deep breath. "Maybe we should take a break. While I'm in college, see where we both are in a few years." Dylan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "A break," he said. "You mean a breakup?" "I mean, maybe we shouldn't try to force something that isn't working anymore. So that's it? After everything we've been through, everything we've shared, you're just done? I wanted to explain that it wasn't that simple, that I still cared about him but couldn't sacrifice my future for a relationship that had become toxic. Instead, I just nodded. Yeah, I said quietly. I think I'm done. Dylan stood up abruptly. Fine, he said. But don't expect me to be here waiting when you realize you made a mistake. I drove myself home that afternoon, crying the entire way. Despite everything, ending things with Dylan felt like losing a piece of myself. He'd been such a central part of my life for 6 months that I didn't know who I was without him. I spent the evening in my room, ignoring my parents' tentative attempts to check on me. I turned off my phone, not wanting to deal with Dylan's inevitable angry texts or Jessica's well-meaning but unhelpful attempts to comfort me. I had no idea that breaking up with Dylan had just set in motion a chain of events that would define my reputation for years to come. I turned my phone back on the next morning to find 37 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from Jessica, but there were also messages from numbers I didn't recognize, and several missed calls from my cousin who lived in the next town over. The first message I read was from Jessica. Emma, call me immediately. Dylan's lost his mind. I called her back, still groggy from my restless night of sleep. Oh my God, finally, she said when she answered. Have you seen what Dylan posted? No, what are you talking about? Check Facebook and Instagram and basically every social media platform that exists. I opened Facebook with a sense of dread. The first thing I saw was a post from Dylan that had been shared hundreds of times. Party tonight at Harbor View Apartments 5B. Emma Chen dumped me, so I'm throwing the biggest party this town has ever seen. Everyone's invited. Address is 1247 Harbor Drive. Code is 4729. Bring whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Let's burn this place down. My blood ran cold. The post had been shared by virtually everyone I knew, plus dozens of people I'd never heard of. The comments were a mix of excitement about the parties and speculation about our breakup. He can't be serious, I said to Jessica. He's dead serious. He's been posting about it all night. Emma, he's telling everyone that you broke his heart, and this is his way of getting over you. I scrolled through Dylan's Instagram, where he'd posted multiple stories about the party, photos of the apartment, videos of him talking about how hurt he was, constant mentions of how this was all because Emma decided she was too good for me. I have to stop this, I said. How? The party's in like 6 hours. Half the school is already planning to go. I tried calling Dylan, but he didn't answer. I sent him text after text, begging him to cancel the party, reminding him that it wasn't his apartment to destroy. He finally responded with a single message. You wanted to be done with me? Fine. But you don't get to control what I do now. I spent the entire day trying to undo the damage Dylan had started. I called every mutual friend we had, explaining that the party was a terrible idea and that Dylan didn't actually have permission to use the apartment. Most people didn't care. They were excited about the prospect of a massive party in a beautiful apartment, and my protest just sounded like jealous ex-girlfriend drama. Come on, Emma, said Marcus, a guy from our chemistry class. It's just a party. Don't be such a buzzkill. You don't understand, I said. That apartment doesn't belong to his family. He's going to get in serious trouble. He's a big boy, Marcus said. He can handle his own problems. I even tried contacting Dylan's mother, but she wasn't home and didn't return my call. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my ex-boyfriend was planning a party? That wasn't exactly a crime. By 4 p.m., I was desperate enough to consider showing up at the apartment myself to try to stop people from entering. Jessica talked me out of it. You'll just make yourself look crazy, she said. And it's not your responsibility to clean up Dylan's mess. But everyone's going to blame me when this goes wrong, I said. Why would they blame you? Because Dylan's telling everyone this is my fault. Because I'm the one who broke up with him. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Emma, you know that's not how responsibility works, right? You're not responsible for Dylan's choices just because you broke up with him. Logically, I knew she was right. Emotionally, I felt like I had somehow caused this entire disaster. I didn't go to the party, but I followed the chaos unfold on social media throughout the evening. It started innocently enough. Photos of people arriving, selfies in the beautiful apartment, videos of underage drinking and casual drug use. But as the night progressed, the posts became more alarming. Someone had opened all the windows and people were smoking inside. Someone else had spilled red wine on the white couch. The pristine kitchen was covered in empty bottles and food containers. By 10 p.m., it was clear that things were completely out of control. Videos showed dozens of people crammed into the apartment, music blasting, people dancing on furniture, someone drawing on the walls with markers. "This is insane," Jessica texted me. "There have to be like 200 people there." At 11:30 p.m., everything went silent on social media. No more photos, no more videos, no more updates. I knew that meant only one thing. The police had shut it down. I spent the rest of the night awake, refreshing social media and waiting for news. Around 2 a.m., the first reports started trickling in from people who'd been at the party. The police had arrived to multiple noise complaints and found what they later described as a riot in progress. The apartment was completely destroyed, furniture broken, walls damaged, carpet stained beyond repair. The special air filtration system that I would later learn about had been completely ruined by cigarette and marijuana smoke. Dylan had been arrested, along with about a dozen other people who were either too drunk to leave or too belligerent to cooperate with police. But the worst part was that the apartment wasn't Dylan's to destroy. The truth came out over the next few days as news of the party spread throughout our small town. The apartment didn't belong to Dylan's father. It belonged to a graduate student named Kevin Chen, no relation to me despite the shared last name, who was participating in a research study about air quality and asthma. Kevin was a 24-year-old pursuing his master's degree in environmental science at the State University. The apartment was part of a study about how different air filtration systems affected people with severe asthma. Kevin had severe asthma himself and had volunteered to live in the specially equipped apartment for 6 months while researchers monitored his health. The apartment's air filtration system was worth more than $50,000 and had been custom designed for the study. The walls had been specially sealed. The ventilation system was experimental, and even the furniture had been chosen for its hypoallergenic properties. Dylan had somehow gotten the door code, probably from someone who knew Kevin, and had been using the apartment for months without permission. Kevin had been away visiting family and didn't even know about the unauthorized usage until he tried to return home and found his apartment destroyed. The damage was catastrophic. The air filtration system was completely ruined by smoke. The furniture was broken or stained beyond repair. The specially sealed walls had been damaged by people writing on them and hanging decorations. Even the floors had been damaged by spilled alcohol and food. The total cost of the damage was estimated at over $20,000, not including the loss of months of research data and the cost of finding Kevin alternative housing while repairs were made. Dylan was charged with breaking and entering criminal mischief and destruction of property. Since he was 17, he was technically still a minor, but the severity of the charges meant he could potentially be tried as an adult. But Dylan didn't go quietly. From the moment he was arrested, he maintained that the party was my fault. He told the police that he'd thrown the party because I'd broken his heart and that he'd been emotionally distraught about our breakup. He told the newspapers that covered the story that I was the reason for everything. He posted on social media from his phone before his mother confiscated it, claiming that I had driven him to desperation with my cruel rejection. Emma Chen destroyed my life first. He posted on Facebook. So I guess it's only fair that she helped destroy that apartment too. The post was shared hundreds of times before it was deleted. Screenshots circulated for weeks. Dylan's friends rallied to his defense, painting me as a cold-hearted girl who had used him and then discarded him when something better came along. They spread rumors that I had cheated on him with college guys, that I had never really loved him, that I had been planning to break up with him all along. Emma's the reason Dylan lost it, posted Sarah Williams, a girl who'd never even spoken to me before. She broke his heart and then acted like it was no big deal. Of course, he was going to do something crazy. Within a week, the narrative was firmly established. I was the villain who had driven poor Dylan to destroy the apartment. Never mind that I'd tried to stop him. Never mind that I'd had no idea he didn't have permission to use the apartment. Never mind that throwing a destructive party was his choice, not mine. I was the girl who broke Dylan Martinez's heart, and therefore I was responsible for everything that followed. Going back to school the Monday after the party was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Everyone stared at me as I walked through the hallways. Conversations stopped when I approached. People whispered and pointed. Some of my classmates were outright hostile. Several people had been arrested at the party, and they blamed me for their legal troubles. Others were angry that they'd lost their phones or other belongings in the chaos of the police raid. "Thanks a lot, Emma," said Brittany Moore as I walked past her locker. "My parents are making me pay for a lawyer because of your drama." "Hope you're happy," added her friend Chloe. "Dylan's life is ruined because you couldn't handle a relationship." Even people who weren't directly affected by the party seemed to view me as responsible. I'd become a cautionary tale about the dangers of teenage heartbreak, the girl whose rejection had driven someone to criminal behavior. My teachers were sympathetic but unhelpful. They could see that I was struggling, but they couldn't do anything about the social dynamics that were making my life miserable. "Just ignore them," advised Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher. "This will blow over eventually." But it didn't blow over. If anything, it got worse as more details about the apartment and the research study became public. The local newspaper ran a story about the impact on Kevin's research, and several people pointed out that my last name was the same as his. "It's like she destroyed her own family's property," someone posted on Facebook, even though Kevin and I weren't related. Jessica remained loyal, but several of my other friends distanced themselves from me. They didn't want to be associated with the drama, and they didn't want to become targets themselves. "I still care about you," said Melissa, a girl I'd been friends with since middle school. "But I can't be seen hanging out with you right now. My parents would kill me if they thought I was involved in this mess." The situation was devastating for my family as well. My parents were mortified by the negative attention and the association with criminal activity. My father, who worked as an accountant for a local business, worried that the scandal would affect his professional reputation. "Do you understand what you've done to this family?" my mother asked during one of our many arguments about the situation. "People at work are asking me about what happened. Your father's boss mentioned it at a meeting." "I didn't do anything," I protested. "Dylan made his own choices." "You broke up with him," she said. "You knew he was unstable, and you broke up with him anyway. So I was supposed to stay with him forever because he might do something crazy if I left? You were supposed to think about the consequences of your actions." My younger sister Maya was getting teased at school because of her association with me. She was only 14 and in 8th grade, but she was being called the sister of the party girl and blamed for something she had no part in. "Why did you have to date someone so stupid?" she asked me one evening as we were doing homework. "Now everyone at school thinks our whole family's trashy." The guilt was overwhelming. Not only was I dealing with my own social ostracism, but I was watching my family suffer because of choices Dylan had made. I started having panic attacks and trouble sleeping. I couldn't concentrate in class, and my grades continued to slip. My parents suggested therapy, but I was too embarrassed to talk to a stranger about what had happened. Everyone in town knows who I am, I told them. There's no such thing as confidentiality when you live in a place this small. Going back to school the Monday after the party was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Everyone stared at me as I walked through the hallways. Conversation stopped when I approached. People whispered and pointed. Some of my classmates were outright hostile. Several people had been arrested at the party, and they blamed me for their legal troubles. Others were angry that they'd lost their phones or other belongings in the chaos of the police raid. "Thanks a lot, Emma," said Brittany Moore as I walked past her locker. "My parents are making me pay for a lawyer because of your drama." "Hope you're happy," added her friend Chloe. "Dylan's life is ruined because you couldn't handle a relationship." Even people who weren't directly affected by the party seemed to view me as responsible. I'd become a cautionary tale about the dangers of teenage heartbreak, the girl whose rejection had driven someone to criminal behavior. My teachers were sympathetic but unhelpful. They could see that I was struggling, but they couldn't do anything about the social dynamics that were making my life miserable. "Just ignore them," advised Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher. "This will blow over eventually." But it didn't blow over. If anything, it got worse as more details about the apartment and the research study became public. The local newspaper ran a story about the impact on Kevin's research, and several people pointed out that my last name was the same as his. "It's like she destroyed her own family's property," someone posted on Facebook, even though Kevin and I weren't related. Jessica remained loyal, but several of my other friends distanced themselves from me. They didn't want to be associated with the drama, and they didn't want to become targets themselves. "I still care about you," said Melissa, a girl I'd been friends with since middle school. "But I can't be seen hanging out with you right now. My parents would kill me if they thought I was involved in this mess." The situation was devastating for my family as well. My parents were mortified by the negative attention and the association with criminal activity. My father, who worked as an accountant for a local business, worried that the scandal would affect his professional reputation. "Do you understand what you've done to this family?" my mother asked during one of our many arguments about the situation. "People at work are asking me about what happened. Your father's boss mentioned it at a meeting." "I didn't do anything," I protested. "Dylan made his own choices." "You broke up with him," she said. "You knew he was unstable, and you broke up with him anyway. So I was supposed to stay with him forever because he might do something crazy if I left? You were supposed to think about the consequences of your actions." My younger sister Maya was getting teased at school because of her association with me. She was only 14 and in 8th grade, but she was being called the sister of the party girl and blamed for something she had no part in. "Why did you have to date someone so stupid?" she asked me one evening as we were doing homework. "Now everyone at school thinks our whole family's trashy." The guilt was overwhelming. Not only was I dealing with my own social ostracism, but I was watching my family suffer because of choices Dylan had made. I started having panic attacks and trouble sleeping. I couldn't concentrate in class, and my grades continued to slip. My parents suggested therapy, but I was too embarrassed to talk to a stranger about what had happened. "Everyone in town knows who I am," I told them. "There's no such thing as confidentiality when you live in a place this small." As Dylan's court date approached, my name continued to be dragged through the mud. Dylan's lawyer was apparently planning to use our relationship and breakup as part of his defense strategy, arguing that Dylan had been emotionally traumatized and not thinking clearly. A representative from the lawyer's office even contacted me, asking if I would be willing to testify about Dylan's state of mind after our breakup. "Absolutely not," I told them. "I'm not going to help you blame me for what Dylan did." "We're not trying to blame you," the paralegal said. "We're just trying to establish that Dylan was emotionally compromised at the time of the incident." Then, find someone else to establish that. I'm not participating in this. But my refusal to cooperate only fueled more speculation about my role in the incident. Dylan's supporters claimed that I was being vindictive and uncooperative, that I didn't care about the consequences of my actions. If Emma really didn't do anything wrong, why won't she help Dylan? Posted one of his friends. She knows she drove him to this, and now she won't even own up to it. Meanwhile, Kevin, the graduate student whose apartment had been destroyed, was dealing with his own nightmare. His research had been set back by months. He'd lost irreplaceable data, and he was having to live in temporary housing while his apartment was repaired. Kevin gave an interview to the local newspaper about the impact of the party on his life and research. He was remarkably gracious, given the circumstances, and didn't blame me personally for what had happened. This was caused by someone making very poor decisions, he said. I don't think it's fair to blame anyone except the person who actually chose to throw the party. But his interview included details about the specialized nature of the apartment and the research that made the destruction seem even more senseless and cruel. Dylan's trial took place in July, 2 months after the party. As a 17-year-old, he was ultimately tried as a juvenile, but the charges were still serious. He was facing potential detention time, community service, and full restitution for the damages. I wasn't required to testify, but I attended the trial anyway. I felt like I needed to see how this story ended, even though I knew it would be painful. Dylan's lawyer did indeed try to use our relationship as a mitigating factor. They argued that Dylan was a good kid who had made a terrible mistake while in emotional distress. They brought in character witnesses who testified about his positive qualities and his potential for rehabilitation. They also painted me as the catalyst for Dylan's breakdown. Without naming me directly in court, they referred repeatedly to the devastating romantic rejection that had preceded the incident. The prosecutor pushed back against this narrative, arguing that emotional distress was not an excuse for criminal behavior and that Dylan had made a series of deliberate choices that led to massive property damage. The defendant didn't throw this party in a moment of passion, the prosecutor argued. He planned it for hours, advertised it on social media, and deliberately encouraged destructive behavior. This was not the act of someone who was temporarily insane with grief. Kevin testified about the impact of the damage on his research and his life. He was articulate and sympathetic, and his testimony clearly affected the judge. Dylan was ultimately sentenced to 6 months in juvenile detention, 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of $22,000 to cover the damages to the apartment and the research equipment. The restitution amount made headlines in our local newspaper, cementing Dylan's status as the teenager who had caused more property damage than anyone in the town's recent history. Dylan's sentencing should have been the end of the story, but in many ways, it was just the beginning of my long-term struggle with the reputation I'd acquired. Dylan served his 6 months in detention and returned to town in January of my senior year. By then, I'd managed to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. My grades had improved, I'd gotten a part-time job at a bookstore, and I was looking forward to starting college in the fall. But Dylan's return reignited all the old gossip and speculation. He'd apparently spent his time in detention crafting a more elaborate version of his victimization story, and he was eager to share it with anyone who would listen. According to Dylan's new narrative, I had been manipulating and using him throughout our entire relationship. He claimed that I had known about his family's financial struggles and had deliberately gotten him to spend money on me that he couldn't afford. He said that I had encouraged him to take me to expensive places, like the apartment, to impress me, then dumped him as soon as I got accepted to college. Emma never loved me, he told people. She was just using me as entertainment until something better came along. She knew I would do anything for her, and she took advantage of that. Some people bought into this revised version of events. Others were skeptical, especially since Dylan's story kept changing and becoming more elaborate over time. But the damage to my reputation was already done. I was still known as the girl who caused the party, And Dylan's return just reminded everyone of the incident all over again. My senior year of high school was marked by a constant low-level stress about my reputation and how it might affect my future. College applications asked about disciplinary issues and criminal activity, and while I hadn't been charged with anything, I worried that colleges might somehow connect me to the incident. I was also concerned about how the notoriety might affect my college experience. Our town was small, but it wasn't that far from the state university I'd be attending. Would people there know about what had happened? Would I be starting college with the stigma already attached to my name? My guidance counselor tried to reassure me that colleges wouldn't hold Dylan's actions against me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the incident would follow me wherever I went. "You need to stop letting this define you," Jessica said during one of our conversations about college and the future. "You didn't do anything wrong. Dylan made his own choices." "But everyone thinks I'm responsible," I said. "And maybe they're right. Maybe if I'd handled the breakup differently—" "Stop," Jessica interrupted. "You can't think like that. You're not responsible for managing other people's emotions to the point where you sacrifice your own life and happiness." She was right, but it was hard to internalize that truth when so many people in my community seemed to disagree. I also struggled with dating and relationships throughout my senior year. Word had gotten around about what had happened with Dylan, and guys seemed either completely intimidated by the drama associated with my name or overly interested in me because of the notoriety. "I heard you really know how to drive guys crazy," said Brad, a guy from my calculus class who asked me out in March. "That's kind of hot." I declined the date. Graduation couldn't come soon enough. I'd managed to finish high school with decent grades despite everything, and I was ready to start fresh at college where hopefully nobody would know about the apartment incident. The graduation ceremony itself was awkward. Dylan was there having finished his high school requirements while in detention. We didn't speak, but I was aware of his presence throughout the ceremony. During the reception afterward, several people made comments that reminded me that my reputation hadn't faded as much as I'd hoped. "Try not to break any college boys' hearts," said Mrs. Anderson, my former chemistry teacher, in what I think it was supposed to be a joking tone. "Maybe you'll find someone who can handle your intensity," added Mr. Rodriguez, Dylan's former history teacher. Even well-meaning comments felt like references to the incident that had defined my final 2 years of high school. My parents threw a small graduation party for me at our house, inviting close family and a few friends. It was a subdued affair, nothing like the big celebration some of my classmates were having, but it felt appropriate given everything we'd been through. "I'm proud of you for getting through this," my mother said as we cleaned up after the party. "I know it hasn't been easy." "Thanks," I said. "I'm just ready to move on." "College will be a fresh start," my father added. "You can be whoever you want to be there." I hoped he was right. Starting college at State University felt like stepping into a different world. For the first time in 2 years, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my story. I was just Emma Chen, freshman psychology major, not the girl who caused the party. My roommate, Sarah, was from a city 3 hours away and had never heard of Millbrook or the apartment incident. She seemed normal and friendly, and I was grateful for the opportunity to make a friend who knew nothing about my past. For the first few weeks, I reveled in my anonymity. I attended classes, joined study groups, went to campus events. Nobody whispered about me or gave me meaningful looks. I was just another freshman trying to figure out college life. But my relief was short-lived. During October of my freshman year, I was in the dining hall with Sarah when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Holy shit. Is that Emma Chen? I turned around to see Marcus Williams, a guy who'd graduated from Millbrook the year before me. He was sitting with a group of upperclassmen pointing at me with a grin on his face. "That's the girl I told you guys about," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "The one whose boyfriend destroyed that apartment because she dumped him." My stomach dropped. I grabbed Sarah's arm and tried to steer her toward the exit, but Marcus called out to me à voix. "Emma. Hey, Emma. How's college treating you?" Anyone here brave enough to date the heartbreaker yet? The dining hall wasn't huge and his voice carried. Several people turned to look at us, curious about what was going on. "Who is he?" Sarah whispered. "Someone from my hometown," I said. "Can we please just leave?" But the damage was done. Within a few days, the story had spread through my dorm and into my classes. It was like high school all over again, except now I was dealing with more mature people who should have known better than to engage in gossip. College gossip spreads differently than high school gossip, but it spreads just as fast. Within a week of Marcus's dining hall announcement, I was getting curious looks from people I'd never met. Someone had apparently looked up the old newspaper articles about Dylan's arrest and the apartment damage, and the story was making rounds on social media. "Is it true that your ex-boyfriend destroyed a $50,000 apartment because you broke up with him?" asked Lisa, a girl from my psychology class. "It's more complicated than that," I said, but I could see that she'd already made up her mind about what kind of person I was. My professors seemed to have heard something too. Dr. Martinez, who taught my introduction to psychology course, pulled me aside after class one day. "I wanted you to know that I don't put any stock in rumors," she said kindly, "but I've heard some students talking, and I want you to know that if you need any support or resources, my office door is always open." I appreciated her gesture, but it was humiliating to know that my professors were discussing my personal life. Sarah, my roommate, was initially supportive, but I could tell she was uncomfortable with the attention my notoriety was bringing to our room. People would stop by to get a look at the heartbreaker, and Sarah started spending more time at the library and less time in our dorm. "It's not that I don't want to be your friend," she said one evening after a particularly awkward encounter with some girls from down the hall. "But I'm trying to establish my own reputation here, and this drama is kind of a lot." I understood, but it still hurt to lose one of my first college friendships because of something that had happened 2 years earlier. I tried various strategies to escape my reputation throughout my freshman year. I changed my appearance, cutting my hair short and dyeing it a different color. I joined clubs where nobody from my hometown was likely to be. I even considered transferring to a different school. But the story seemed to follow me wherever I went. Social media made it impossible to truly escape your past, and someone always seemed to know someone who knew the story. During my sophomore year, I started dating again. I met Jake in my statistics class, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me rather than hearing about my infamous past. We dated for about 3 months before he brought up the apartment incident. "I heard something about you and some crazy party in high school," he said one evening as we were studying together. "Is that true?" I told him the real story, explaining what had actually happened and how my role had been exaggerated over time. Jake seemed to understand, but our relationship never felt the same after that conversation. He started asking questions about my other relationships, my dating history, my emotional stability. "I just want to make sure you're not going to go crazy if we break up," he said during an argument a few weeks later. We broke up the next day. I initiated it, tired of being treated like a potential threat to his property and mental health. By my junior year, I was starting to think seriously about my career and post-graduation plans. I wanted to go to graduate school in psychology, possibly specializing in adolescent counseling or trauma therapy, but I discovered that my reputation was still following me and in ways I hadn't anticipated. During a meeting with my faculty advisor about graduate school applications, she brought up some concerns. "I need to ask you about something," Dr. Thompson said. "I've heard some rumors about an incident in your hometown involving property damage and legal issues. Can you help me understand what happened?" I explained the situation once again, emphasizing my lack of involvement in Dylan's decisions and the damage to the apartment. "I believe you," Dr. Thompson said, "but you need to understand that graduate programs and employers might hear these stories and have concerns. You should be prepared to address this in interviews." The idea that I might have to explain Dylan's actions for the rest of my professional life was devastating. I'd assumed that by the time I was applying for graduate school, the incident would be ancient history. Instead, it seemed like it might be a permanent part of my narrative. I started researching how to legally change my name, wondering if that might be the only way to truly escape the association with the apartment incident. Going home for holidays and breaks became increasingly difficult as I progressed through college. Millbrook was a small town with a long memory, and I was still known as the girl who caused the party to anyone over the age of 30. During Christmas break of my junior year, I ran into Kevin, the graduate student whose apartment had been destroyed. He was visiting family in town and recognized me at the grocery store. "You're Emma Chen," he said, approaching me in the produce section. I braced myself for an angry confrontation, but Kevin seemed more curious than hostile. "I wanted to thank you," he said, which was not what I'd expected to hear. "Thank me for what?" "For trying to stop the party. I heard from some people that you spent the whole day trying to talk people out of going and trying to get your ex-boyfriend to cancel it." I was shocked that he knew about my attempts to prevent the party. "How did you hear about that?" "Small towns talk," he said with a smile. "And not everyone believed that you were responsible for what happened. Some people remembered that you'd tried to stop it. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone had acknowledged my attempts to prevent the disaster. Kevin's words meant more to me than I could express. "I'm sorry about your research," I said. "I know the damage set you back significantly." "It did," he said. "But I finished my degree eventually, and I learned some valuable lessons about apartment security. I'm actually doing my PhD now, studying the psychological impacts of property crime on victims." We talked for a few more minutes, and Kevin mentioned that he'd never blamed me for what happened. "Your ex-boyfriend made his own choices," he said. "And from what I heard, you tried to stop him. I never understood why people blamed you for his decisions." Now, at 24, 8 years after the incident, I'm finally starting to feel like I might be able to move beyond the reputation that defined my late teens and early 20s. I finished college with a degree in psychology and am currently working as a counselor at a community mental health center 2 states away from Millbrook. Most of my colleagues and clients don't know about my past, and I've been able to build a professional reputation based on my actual skills and qualifications rather than a decade-old scandal. I still struggle with relationships and trust issues. The experience of being blamed for someone else's destructive choices taught me to be hyper-vigilant about other people's emotional states and to feel responsible for managing them. Therapy has helped, but it's an ongoing process. Dylan, as far as I know, still lives in Millbrook. I heard through social media that he had more legal troubles in his early 20s and has struggled to maintain steady employment. I don't take any satisfaction in his difficulties, but I also don't feel responsible for them anymore. The apartment incident taught me some harsh lessons about how quickly your reputation can be destroyed by other people's actions and how difficult it can be to rebuild once it's damaged. But it also taught me about resilience, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who believe in your character, and about the difference between taking responsibility for your own actions and accepting blame for things that are beyond your control. I still wish it were fiction. I still wish I could go back and handle things differently, though I'm not sure what I could have done to change the outcome. But I've learned to live with the fact that sometimes you become part of someone else's story in ways you never intended, and that the only thing you can control is how you respond to the narrative that others create about you. Jessica was right when she told me that I wasn't responsible for managing other people's emotions to the point of sacrificing my own happiness. It just took me 8 years to fully understand what she meant. The girl who destroyed everything has finally learned that the only thing she was actually responsible for destroying was a toxic relationship that needed to end. Everything else was Dylan's choice and his responsibility to live with. I'm still working on believing that completely, but I'm getting there. Some days, that feels like enough.